Welcome to The George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler today. You pretty much guessed, I bet, right away that I am not George Brauchler. It is so good to be here with you today for my show, heard every day, 3 to 4 p.m. Jimmy Sangenberger will be sitting in for me because, as I said last time, coffee just won't get me that far. But I'm glad that you are up and starting the day with 710 KNUS. So appreciate your being a part of the conversation. Well, one of the things that we talked about on Friday on my show, and there was a great guest I'm going to tell you about in a moment, but I wanted to highlight this as well. So yesterday, January 22nd, was the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. There was a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding, disinformation, perhaps intentional, about what the overturn of Roe v. Wade meant last summer. Many of you know because you're well-educated listeners, and I appreciate that, is all the overturn of Roe v. Wade did was send it back to the states. That's all it did. And it's interesting because despite the histrionics that you hear from the other side, it actually simply did what many people even thought would have been the right thing to do, even, by the way, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who had frequently said, or had said on record, I should say, I don't know how frequently, but that Roe v. Wade was a poorly decided decision. Bernard Nathanson, the top doctor, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who testified and gave a lot of statistics during the hearing of Roe v. Wade 50 years ago. Many people admitted that some of the statistics were not based on any actual data, just hypotheticals. But what turned him around was not some conversion to faith or epiphany. It was seeing the onset of ultrasound, which, not coincidentally, if you see things as serendipitous, really came onto the scene right after Roe v. Wade. Now, why do I talk about this? Because obviously in Colorado, the citizens have numerous times voted against certain propositions that would have made changes. However, the bill passed last year in the legislature here in Colorado is far extreme beyond what the average citizen even agrees with. Now, I'm going to talk about a few things here because we're going to have coming up in the show, just to give you an outline, Congressman Ken Buck will be here with us at 9 o'clock in the fourth hour of the show. Coming up in the next hour, we've got Senator Mark Baisley, State Senator Mark Baisley, talking about what's going on under the dome and also talking about some of this and an initiative and a proposal and a hearing that's going on today. And then in the next hour, in the third hour, we're going to have Alliance Defending Freedom's Ryan Tucker. He's a senior legal counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, with some good news, by the way. Always want to try and share good news. The good news that he's going to share are some wins that have been happening in the area of religious liberty and educational freedom, which is huge. So we want to share that good news. But the reason why I bring up Ken Buck also is we're going to talk about what happened that when the House passed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, 210 Democrats walked out. Now, we're going to talk about the fact that it is time to rephrase this argument. So it is amazing to me that those who adhere to an extreme pro-abortion position, those in the Democrat Party who have made this really their holy grail, absolutely no compromising on it. We're going to talk about some common sense things that the vast majority of Americans care about. Call those who are calling for common sense compromises and adjustments extreme. I want to talk about where the really extreme position is on this, and that as people coming from a conservative viewpoint, not meaning stuck in the mud, as some people think that interpretation means, but there are certain things worth conserving, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, the point is this. The extreme position is definitely on the other side, and it does not represent the vast majority of Americans who, whether they call themselves pro-choice or pro-life, are very common sense about a lot of this. They're not extreme. So yesterday, 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, obviously overturned by Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision. Well, Friday, was the 50th anniversary of the march, the longest ongoing civil rights movement in the history of the United States. Now, you can say, obviously, the horrors of slavery and then Jim Crow laws, that was a very long-term civil rights movement to finally get the civil rights movement actions taken in the 60s. But the actual really concerted movement was only really 13 years during the life and work of Martin Luther King Jr. when he was very active in 13 years. So this has been going on for 50 years. Hundreds of thousands of people show up. You will never hear that in the mainstream media because in the mainstream media, they like to downplay it. Hundreds of thousands, over half of them are young people because they have grown up in a world where they are very aware of ultrasound, where they are very aware that their peers are here solely because they were wanted. That's really it. Now, the interesting thing that people also overlook about the March for Life is that many of the people who march are women who have had an abortion and realize they wish they had another choice. Great organizations like Silent No More, Awareness Campaign, women who are not silent about wishing they had been given another choice instead of going into a Planned Parenthood facility and being told your only choice is 11 a.m. or 1 p.m. That's kind of the choice that's given to them. So here is some stuff that I want to share about the extreme position that the Democrats increasingly take. When and if you've ever been to the March for Life, it is upbeat. It is probably the best behaved hundreds of thousands of people you would ever see. You never hear of incidents. In fact, they pick up the trash after themselves. And if you want to hear an interesting interview about it, I spoke last week with Dr. Alveda King, both about the anniversary of her uncle's death, Martin Luther King Jr. Her husband was, her father was also a slain civil rights leader, Reverend A.D. King. And then she also talked about the connection between that and the decimation that has happened in the urban center. And the reason why we talked about that is because that which those who really are extremists on the abortion issue don't want to talk about, first of all, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, she was a eugenicist. We just have to be really clear about that. What was the purpose that she started this with? She's actually stated that she believed society would be better off without immigrants, Blacks, and people with mental disabilities. Now, don't just take my word for it. This is really something I want to share because it's time we reframe this conversation. We are usually on the defense. We accept an argument that is putting us in the defense. And when you're defending yourself, you are losing. So whenever people say, oh, you believe in some kind of moderation on abortion, or you call yourself pro-life, you're extreme. No, let's talk about the extreme position and where it began. In a widely quoted letter to Dr. Clarence J. Gamble, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, said this, and I'm quoting her words before anybody calls me and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that. This is Margaret Sanger. She said, quote, "We do not want the word to go out that we want to exterminate," as she called the Negro population. So Candace Owens, Dr. Carol Swain, Dr. Alveda King, all women who understand both the decimation happening in the Black community, understand the legacy of the civil rights movement. They have noted that 79% of surgical abortion facilities are located within walking distance of African American or Hispanic and Latino neighborhoods. That's not by chance. Even the Guttmacher Institute, Planned Parenthood's own Institute for Finding Out research, says that in the United States, the abortion rate for Black women is almost 5 times that for white women. So let's just talk about that. Those are the roots. That's where it started. And that is how it has continued for the most part. I find it interesting because there's a great group called Feminists for Life. And many people may think that's an oxymoron. It absolutely isn't. They make a great point that women should have been instead had the focus on helping them be able to keep their child if they want to keep their child instead of being told they have no choice. What would have changed if in the 60s and the 70s. Instead, the push had been, okay, let's destigmatize, abortion outside of wedlock, which has been completely destigmatized now. In fact, people in the entertainment and the culture elite call it, oh, that's my baby daddy. Things have changed completely. Certainly the day when young women were so shamed, so afraid of being kicked out of their family that they would seek a back alley abortion, that day has come and gone. Thankfully, that was a terrible day. So the focus should have been on destigmatizing having a child out of wedlock, making the case that being a birth mother, if a young woman cannot take care of that child, a noble thing. I know birth mothers who have done a wonderful thing when they realized perhaps they could not take care of that child and they blessed somebody. You know what also skyrocketed after Roe v. Wade? The list of couples who experience infertility and cannot adopt children. There are a lot of people that would like to. So what if the focus had been on that, as well as giving women support? If you want to go to school, here's the support that you can have to keep your child. You want to go to work, here's the support you can have. That would have been a different argument. And let's really examine the mantra of rare, safe, and legal. That was a mantra of those who were pushing for unfettered abortion. And Roe v. Wade simply said abortion was legal. It was Doe v. Bolton that then defined a woman's health as anything: social, relational, physical, mental, as well as economic, which means that abortion became legal for any reason, pretty much at any time. Now, the new mantra, the old mantra, rare, safe, and legal, let's be clear, and let's not be afraid to talk about this. The reason why I'm talking about it right now, you're going to hear the radical statement and the radical things that the Democrats are pursuing and standing up against. I'll share that in a moment. But the new mantra is not rare. Right now, in the wake of Roe v. Wade, the 50th anniversary and the 50th anniversary of the march, what did the Biden administration pursue? Well, they actually pursued, and they said they would continue to commit to the Women's Healthcare Protection Act, WHPA, which wouldn't just continue Roe, it would radically expand it. Under WHPA, Women's Health Protection Act, once again, Orwellian named, because late-term abortion has been shown to be detrimental to the health of women. Under this proposed thing that Biden is still pushing, and he talked about it through the White House press secretary on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, on the anniversary of the March for Life. Under that legislation that the current resident of the White House is pushing, abortion would be legal until the moment of birth in all 50 states without restrictions. Okay, you want to talk about radical? That is radical. So that would not be rare, not safe either. That is no longer the mantra. Let's be clear. When the Colorado State Legislature, and State Senator Mark Baisley is going to be joining me in the next hour, we're going to talk about this. Last year, when the Colorado State Legislature pushed through one of the most radical pro-abortion bills in all of the world, we'll get to that in a second, they killed pretty much every single amendment that the Republicans brought, including, by the way, an amendment that would have made sterile instruments required in abortion clinics. Okay, rare, legal, and safe. Not exactly what they're pushing for anymore. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, and we've got a lot of other things to talk about today, but in the wake of what President Biden said he is pushing for, basically codifying through legislation abortion up until the moment of birth in all 50 states. That's pretty darn radical. So I want to shift gears now, because when we're looking at this, here's what's radical. And Congressman Ken Buck is going to be with me in the final hour at 9 o'clock. We're going to talk about this. I was stunned when the House passed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Let's just be clear about what that said. That did not say a woman couldn't go in for an abortion. That did not say the woman had to continue to carry the baby to term. All it said is if a woman had an abortion and the baby survived, that the doctors would provide care for that living, breathing human being now separate from the mother completely. 210 Democrats walked out. And let's be clear, Nancy Pelosi blocked this bill 80 times when she ran the House. What's interesting, so my guest on Friday, feel free to go hear that on the Deborah Flora show in our podcast, was a woman named Jill Stanek, because when we tried to pass this in the Colorado legislature, that a living, breathing human being separate from their mother, a survivor of abortion, would receive medical care, just basic, humane, non-barbaric common sense. I was in the committee when the hearing was taking place. And of course, this was not sent to the Health and Human Services Committee. This was sent to what is known as the KILL Committee, the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. And what was the argument against this bill? Planned Parenthood brought forward 3 OBGYNs who all said the bill was completely unnecessary because no child survives abortion. I'm only bringing this up so we can understand how extreme and point out where the extreme side is. Even if you're listening and you are pro-choice, I think we can all come together and say this is extreme. So when they said that, someone on the committee did a great job. One of the only 3 Republicans versus I think it was 4 Democrats said, really, here's a stack from government statistics of all the children that have survived abortion. And then to which the OBGYN doctor, one of them said, well, it hasn't happened in my reality. It's amazing how science goes out the window when it doesn't fit their narrative. So the reason why I had Jill Stanek on, Jill Stanek was the nurse who discovered in an Illinois hospital called Christ Hospital, very poorly named, shall we say, that there were children that were surviving abortion. Tough topic early in the morning, but important to know. So we have facts to counter the narrative that immediately wants to put us on the defense when we are actually coming from simply a humane perspective. And one night she saw a nurse walking along with a baby that had survived abortion, taking the child to a linen closet filled with dirty linens where they left the babies to die. She couldn't handle it. Jill, our friend, who had refused to work on abortions to assist with those, and she instead went back to that room, held that baby for the minutes that it survived, and rocked it because she just couldn't handle the barbarism of it. She then folded its arms, wrapped it, and took it to the morgue, which repeatedly received these little bodies. So yes, it does happen. I personally know 2 people who are in their 20s who survived abortion. So let's just get that out of the way. But let's just be clear about where the extreme position is. That is the extreme position. And when the Born Alive Protection Act that was signed into law in 2002 by then President George W. Bush, and Jill Stanek was standing next to him. When that passed the legislature in the Senate, it passed unanimously. All senators, including then Senator Joe Biden, voting for it. How far we have come in 21 years when 210 Democrats would vote against it. 1 Democrat voted for it from Texas, 1 voted present, also from Texas. I want to bring that up because when we are looking at the Biden administration now trying to push the Orwellian name Women's Health Protection Act, because we just showed here in Colorado, for instance, nothing about protecting women's health when you do not even want sterile instruments required in an abortion clinic. We need to no longer be on the defense. Granted, it is not something that is going to be a winning issue in Colorado. But instead of being on the defense, time to put the real, truly radical people in the indefensible position in which they are. Okay, that's just my little tirade when yesterday was the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it was a poorly decided decision and it should go back to the states, which it has. So we'll continue to have this conversation here in Colorado. We will have a conversation with both Mark Baisley and with Ken Buck coming up on the show about this. But when we come back, we're going to talk about Alec Baldwin. Now, I don't talk about Alec Baldwin almost ever And he may have already formed an opinion on the case where he was charged with 2 charges of involuntary manslaughter. The reason why I'm going to bring it up is because during my period of temporary insanity, when I was in Hollywood after growing up here in Colorado, I actually was an actress. I was a producer. So I've been on every side of this gun issue on sets. I have had one pointed at me. I have pointed one, and I produced films and TV projects where weaponry is used. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what is supposed to happen on a set, what didn't happen on a set, and where the responsibility ultimately lies. So when we come back, we are going to talk about that. Before we do, quick question. Someone just texted regarding the abortion issue. Please give me a logical explanation why a handful of cells has precedent over me, with a fully formed life or person. Hey, that's a conversation that we can have. What I'm talking about is getting to the middle ground where most people live. 74% of Americans and Coloradans, according to a Harvard poll, agree that there should be some sort of restrictions after the first trimester. What I'm talking about is those who are on the extreme edges that don't even want to support a child that has survived an abortion. Let's get away from the extreme edges and then come and reason together, because 74% of Americans agree there should be some common sense restrictions, and we can talk about that. That would be a good conversation to have. Right now, I'm talking about not allowing the extreme group to put those who are for common sense restrictions, which is 74% of Americans, in the extreme position, because we're not. Because when we do that, then finally we can actually have a conversation. And the other question is, what is your site for dirty instruments? Well, actually, that is in the legislation. If you go to the legislation listed for the bill that was passed last legislative cycle, you will see all of the amendments that were introduced by the Republicans. And one of them had to do with requiring sterile instruments. Across the country, by the way, amendments that people have tried to pass requiring abortion facilities to have hospital admitting rights have been defeated. What that means is if a woman is having an abortion and she suddenly has a crisis and is bleeding out, there is no requirement that abortion clinic get her to a hospital. You can look that up. That is fact. That has occurred over and over and over again. So great questions. I appreciate it, because now we're getting to the areas where we can have conversations, not the non-starters that we as a civilized society should agree. If there's a living human being who is separate from their mother's body, there should be support. I find it interesting, the outrage that happens for the sea turtles. I'm all for helping them get to the sea. For the whales, don't want to see them hurt. But it's time that we understand a living human being separate from their mother's body. There should be no negotiation. That life support should be given to that child as much as any human being deserves that support. Thank you for reaching out, with those questions. That's very good. When we come back, we're going to talk about Alec Baldwin. If you want to also call in on that topic, feel free. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. Also hearing from people on the free 710 KNUS app. Glad to hear from you on that. And I don't really talk a lot about abortion, but the reason why we have to is just to change the narrative. We get too often put in a corner with a false narrative, a straw man argument that actually eliminates the arena where then we can come and reason together in common sense solutions to many things. The extreme side undoubtedly is with the 210 Republicans, who, by the way, don't even represent Democrats. 60% of Democrats, according to a Harvard poll, not a conservative poll, a Harvard poll, want some kind of common sense restrictions and really are not for abortion after the first trimester. 60% of Democrats not being represented by their leadership right now. Okay, when we come back, we're going to move on to the Alec Baldwin situation. Going to take your calls, answer more texts. Love hearing from you. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS, sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. Hope you're having a great morning. I've got a large cup of coffee here. We've got Billy in the booth, and everything is rolling along. So glad you're with me. I had one caller reach out by text and say that they are glad it is not such a snowy morning. Indeed. Love the snow. Glad it is Colorado style, which means it comes, it melts, and then it comes back again. Pretty awesome way to have the snow. So as I was talking about, as we're heading into the break, I want to talk a little bit about the Alec Baldwin situation. I haven't really discussed this before because there's been so much to talk about on my show. And in case you don't hear my show, it is Monday through Friday, every weekday from 3 to 4 p.m. So the Alec Baldwin situation, the reason why I want to chime in on this is because, as I've shared before in my personal story, grew up here in Colorado. My dad was at Lowry Air Force Base, and then I had temporary insanity. I did go to Hollywood. I was an actress for a little while. I'm a recovered actress in my left brain and my right mind. Became a producer. My husband and I have a production company. He worked with Walt Disney Studios for quite a while as a director, writer. I'm a producer. And I've been on every side of this gun on the set situation. I literally have been in a movie where I had someone pointing the gun at me. I have been in a movie where I pointed the gun at someone and shot it. My husband, when he did some acting, he's had the gun pointed at him and fired and, died on camera. Those of you watching online see me doing my air quotes. I have also been a producer on the set. And in fact, when this ruling came down and when the shooting came down, I was on a set where I was producing, where we had weaponry on the set. And I want to just really briefly, from firsthand experience, I know this has been talked about, but from firsthand experience, just tell you what is supposed to happen. And want to hear, I know many of you have already chimed in on this, but your thoughts about it. So just so you know, you all know the details of the case, that last week, Alec Baldwin was charged with 2 charges of involuntary manslaughter for the shooting death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. And she was killed on October 21st, 2021. The director of photography was wounded. They tend to usually be behind one another. And the armorer on the set, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, is also facing charges of involuntary manslaughter. So here's what is supposed to happen. And SAG-AFTRA, which I belong to, that is the union for actors, has come out and talked about what is standard operating procedure on sets. And by the way, some of those movies that I was on were independent films. They were not huge budgets where you have a huge staff. So even on lower budget independent films, not even on the level of Rust, you always have an armorer. And here is the correct procedure. First of all, it is industry standard. There is never, ever a live round on the set. That is industry standard. So when the armorer says that she is going to sue the supplier, unless she can prove that it was somehow inserted there, it is the armorer's job to verify and go through every single piece of ammunition that comes onto the set to make sure it is a squib, that it is not a live round. Many times, by the way, there are no rounds in the chamber because, as we learned long ago with Brandon Lee, the tragic death that he had, that was actually a blank. But even blanks sometimes have enough force to kill someone. And that's what happened with him. It was actually a blank. So you're always careful about it. Now, the reality is, yes, the actors should be aware they're supposed to have training, but oftentimes, first of all, let me just say, I know a lot of actors. I would never rely on any of them being artistic types who usually in the industry don't even like guns. When I was on the other side of that gun, I would never have relied on them to actually know. First of all, it's hard for them to know what a squib looks like, a blank looks like versus the real thing. but an armorer is trained to do that. So what is normally the occurrence, this happened on the set that I was working on the day the shoot happened. It happened this set that I was on when the charges were discussed. It also is how we handle it when I was a producer, when I was an actor, and when I was on both sides of that gun. What is supposed to happen? Any weapon on the set is supposed to be locked away. The ammunition is supposed to be locked away. And by ammunition, I mean blanks, no live round. The only person that is supposed to then unlock it is the armorer. Now, from what I understand, none of it was locked. So whether you want to think there was mischief happening or not, it was never under a constant state, from my understanding, of control. The armorer is supposed to lock everything away. The weapon is only brought out right before the scene. It is the armorer that brings it out. The armorer brings it out, opens up the gun. The director, the DP, both actors on both sides of that weapon, anyone else on the set comes around, looks in it. The armorer takes the blanks out, shows they are blanks, or shows it's an empty chamber, if it's an empty chamber, which is most of the time, unless you have an effect happening, and then closes it, holds it until the camera begins to roll, and then hands it to the actor. As we've seen, many steps were missed in this situation. So that is what wasn't followed. By the way, it was Dave Halls, the movie's first AD. First ADs, by the way, just so you know, their job basically is to assist the director and make sure the set is settled. They are never supposed to be the ones handing the weapon to the actor. That was something that did not go correctly. Another thing, supposedly, the weapon and the blanks, which should have been blanks, were never locked away. And it's interesting that Gutierrez Reed, who is the armorer, basically said that she checked all of it, but that was earlier in the day. You don't check it earlier in the day and leave it. What you do is you check it right before you bring out. You check it, you lock it. There's no live ammo anywhere on the set. I know one caller has reached out about that. There should never be live ammo on the set. That is the industry standard. And it's interesting that Gutierrez Reed said she checked the cartridges, but wished she'd checked it again. Well, guess what? That's what she was supposed to do. So the reality is, while the DA for Santa Fe County is arguing that Alec Baldwin did not take due caution or circumspection, there is a moment when the gun is handed to the actor and they are told it is cold. Now, he should have asked to see inside, not just be told it was cold. He should have, and the armorer should have shown him everything. That is a step that he could have been, Alec Baldwin could have been more conscientious about, to say the least. And I do think he bears some responsibility. Does he bear criminal responsibility? I got to tell you, I'm not a fan of Alec Baldwin other than his acting. He's very talented, and I'm able to separate away someone's acting ability and their personal life, because many actors are artistic, emotionally driven people that react, and therefore their views come from that. But I'm able to separate the two. He's a talented actor who bears some responsibility, but I don't think criminal responsibility. Here's where he got himself in trouble. He basically said he did not pull the trigger. Well, it would have been surprising with misfire, because the FBI did forensics and said the gun did not malfunction. He pulled the trigger. Do I think Alec Baldwin is trying to cover himself? Absolutely. Do I think that he is a man of character? Not from what I've seen of his life. I don't know him personally. I've met him once, but I do not know him personally. So that's my assessment of this situation. I mainly want to share because I've had a lot of people asking me, since I have been on every side of that scenario. We are hearing from listeners right now through our free 710 KNUS app. One says, it's rather simple. No guns on set, fake only. I do think that's where this is moving, and I think it's absolutely necessary. Dwayne Johnson, by the way, in his new movie, has no guns on the set. No real guns. And I think that's perfectly fine. I have been in prop houses in Hollywood. I have handled real guns on set, and I've handled fake guns on set. And there's really not a reason to do it otherwise, especially, by the way, because those of you who are listening who are really pro Second Amendment folks, as I am, I believe in self-protection. My husband was an 82nd Airborne veteran. My dad was in the in the Air Force. So we have grown up in a culture of guns and understand and respect the fact that you never point it at someone until you're ready to shoot it, how you would actually look at it, make sure there's no live round, etc. That's not really something that, unfortunately, we can anticipate that most actors in Hollywood will do, although they should. And instead of them being so anti-gun in the hands of law-abiding citizens, they should instead understand and learn how to be safe around them and have a healthy respect for them. So yes, I do agree with that. Here's another. Alec Baldwin is such an arrogant jerk, and his wife is faking she's from Spain. Ridiculous. So sad a person died and another was injured. Alec will never concede that it was his fault. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I think we can separate whether he is criminally culpable from the way that this has been handled. I don't know personally what he's gone through. It is tragic that this woman was killed, this director of photography. Her family settled a civil case, I believe. It was settled, and but they'll never actually be able to make for the loss of their family members. So that is tragic. So okay, great. So we have gotten some comments on that. If you want to chime in on this, we'll take some calls after the break. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. You can also continue to text in through our free 710 KNUS app. My basic conclusion is this: having been on a set, having been a producer, having held a gun on set as an actor, having had one pointed at me, having had one shot at my husband when he was acting in a project that we actually produced, my conclusion is this: the armorer was completely culpable, should be charged with involuntary manslaughter. I do not think Alec Baldwin should necessarily be charged. That is the purview of the DA. I do not believe he will probably be found guilty. I do not know what the jury will come up with because there's an emotional nature for it. And while he should have been more responsible, I think he was ethically irresponsible, but probably not criminally. Want to hear from you about that. If you have any questions about what it's like to be on a set, because here's the other thing, by the way. It's interesting to me that group that is the most anti-gun in a way, which is the cultural entertainment elite, also doesn't have a healthy understanding of respect for those guns. Every time there was a gun on the set, whether I was holding one, in front of one, or producing a set where there was one, we all had a soberness when that gun was on the set, as everyone should. We're going to a break. We'll be right back. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today. Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Flora sitting in for George Brauchler. Hope you are doing great. Hope you're having a wonderful start to your week. It's a little slow going, my revving up here on Monday. My hat is off to my colleague, George Brauchler, who gets up every day. I have my large cup of coffee here. Those of you who are watching online can see that quite well. Hope that your day is off to a great start and that you had a wonderful weekend. Well, we were talking about the Alec Baldwin situation. Definitely, obviously, happened last week. I just wanted to chime in because I have been on both sides of that gun as an actor when I was in Hollywood, grew up in Colorado, just to make that clear, not a Californian, and also produced projects where there were weapons. So talked through what the normal process is, and then also talked about who really ultimately is responsible. So we were taking some calls. We have Don, you're on the George Brauchler Show. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Good morning, Deb.
Good morning, Don. How are you?
I'm great. It's very refreshing to hear your voice early in the morning.
Well, thank you, sir. And how are you today?
No, I'm up. It's a new day.
It's a good start.
See how the rest of it goes.
Yes, indeed.
Quick question for you, Deb. Are you a gun owner?
I am, yes.
Are you a carry permit owner?
Yes, I am.
You have a carry permit?
Mm-hmm.
Good for you. So, one of the things that I think people fail to realize is there's such a thing as gun handling etiquette.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are ever given a gun, I know myself if somebody presents a gun to show to me, or if I'm going to show it to them one of my firearms,
Yes.
the magazine comes out, it's disarmed when the chamber comes out, I pop the slide back and I hand it to them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always tell somebody with their behavior on what they do as you hand it to them in a safe manner, where
Yes.
the finger goes, where they point it, that type of stuff. So guarantee if Alec Baldwin, who is anti-gun, to the best of my knowledge, along with a lot of the other Hollywood types who have made fortunes blowing people up on the silver screen,
Mm-hmm.
had actually exercised responsible gun handling, this never would have happened.
It's true. And, Don, completely agreed. What's interesting about being on a set, which growing up around guns, being a gun owner and a concealed, carry, having a permit for concealed carry as well, definitely when you actually have your own gun. The thing that is different, as you know, is on a set, there comes a point in time where the gun is given to you and you're literally told to point it at someone and fire it. Usually a flare goes off because of the blank, a blood pad explodes at the other person. So there's that step. But without a doubt, what's missing in Hollywood, to say the least, and it sounds like with the armorer as well as Alec Baldwin, is a healthy understanding and respect for weapons. And by the way, a point I was going to bring up is, where the most accidents happen with real guns in the real world are when people don't understand it, who are not pro Second Amendment. We're going to head to a break, Don. Any last comment on that? Because I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Alec Baldwin, I believe that was a 6-gun. Would have been so simple to pop open the chamber and look and see what it had in it for rounds, just as a matter of practice and proper gun handling. I think this is what's lost in a lot of these. More people are killed with presumed unloaded firearms than they probably are accidentally with a live round firearm. No,
that's a great point, Don. Well, we're heading to the break. I really appreciate your chiming in on that.
Deb.
You too. Thank
Good
you.
chatting with you.
You too. Thank you so much. Well, Don brought up a great point. There needs to be a healthy respect. The thing that showed that there was not the healthy respect for it was when the step was missed. The step was missed where the armorer was supposed to bring the gun in, open it up, show everyone on the set, Alec Baldwin included, that those were squibs or blanks, actually, we should say. That did not happen. He should have demanded that. But the criminal responsibility, I believe, is with the armorer. Well, don't go anywhere. When we come back, At the top of the hour, we're going to have State Senator Mark Baisley to talk about what's happening under the dome in Denver. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS. Hey, Billy, how do I drop that call? Welcome to the George Brauchler Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. Moving on to the second hour. That first hour, the coffee set in, so I'm ready to go. Hope you are already having a great day wherever you are out there. I had one caller say that they were so grateful that there's not a lot of snow right here in the Denver metro area, but I heard from another caller who's driving up to the mountains and said it was starting to snow up there. Not surprising. Those are our wonderful Rocky Mountains. I do love the snow here in Colorado, though, compared to other places. You get it. It snows. It's beautiful. And then it melts. Really glad about that. Well, in the last hour, we were talking about the Alec Baldwin situation. I was sharing because while I grew up in Colorado, I had temporary insanity. I went to Hollywood to be an actress. Came back, but I'm a recovered actress in my left brain and my right mind. I've also been a producer on sets. And we've been talking about what the standard procedure is. I have experienced that from every side, from someone pointing a gun at me and firing on a set, to my having in my hands, to a project we produced, my husband having one shot at him, to being a producer on a set where I wasn't even behind the camera, and the standard procedure was absolutely not followed. But I think what is interesting is the fact that in Hollywood, there is just a lack of culture and understanding. Someone texted one of our listeners about the fact that, that is there any training for Hollywood actors? Not really, not usually. There's supposed to be. There's certainly not a healthy understanding, to the point that another caller, Don, who called in, asked if I was a gun owner, which I am, and concealed carry. I have my permit. And what I find interesting, it was in Hollywood when I was there that I became even more pro Second Amendment. I'm going to tell this quick story about that, which is, in Los Angeles, when I was an actor, it seems like it goes along with your headshots. It goes with your manager, your agent, all of that. I had a stalker. And at the time I did, the LA Threat Management Unit knocked on my door early one morning and said, "You have a serious problem." But here's what they said to me. They said, "Because we can't allow you to carry a gun in Los Angeles, you cannot get a concealed carry. Basically, if you have to defend yourself, we'll just try to make sure that you either get a short prison sentence and hopefully not die." I'm like, so my two choices were prison or death. Neither one was a good one. What is interesting in Hollywood is there is a lack of understanding of the right of citizens to own guns to protect themselves. And in fact, as a woman who has been in a situation where I felt the need to protect myself, I'm not big. You're seeing that on camera. Anyone who's listening and watching online has seen that I'm only about 5'3". This person happened to be 6'4", I think it was, over 250 pounds at least. And that was the way I could defend myself. Well, there's a new bill that is in draft form here in the state legislature. And I have a guest joining me that I'm going to introduce in just a moment to talk about this. We talked about last week on my show. If you don't hear my show, it's every day from 3 to 4 p.m. And we were talking about the fact that there was a draft bill that would literally, if it comes out of the draft situation, make pretty much the vast majority of guns illegal in Colorado. Basically anything that is semi-automatic, and that includes the top 10 guns that women use to protect themselves. So that is not the way to go. The way to go is to have a healthy understanding and respect for weaponry. And probably because the sets that I've been on, the projects I produced, we had the full protocol in place, always with a healthy understanding of what you do and do not do with a weapon. But those who don't understand are usually the ones who have the most upside down position on it. Allow actors in Hollywood to have no training, which they're supposed to, but they often don't. But don't give the rights to law-abiding citizens. Well, to talk about that draft legislation and other things that are coming down under the dome in Denver is my guest today. That is State Senator Mark Baisley, who has just made his way in, which I greatly appreciate. Mark, represents Colorado's 4th State Senate District in Roxborough Park, Colorado. Mark, you're one of the few people I get to say congratulations to after the last election. Congratulations on winning that Senate seat.
Well, thank you, Deborah. It's a joy to see you, my
It
friend.
is.
And great to be in here in George's. I say we rearrange things while George is gone.
Okay, you know what? Let's do it. Usually I'd be coming in at 3:00, so that would throw me off. But Jimmy Sangenberg is going to be filling in for me, so let's just mess with him.
I like it.
How are you today?
I'm good.
Good.
It's a wonderful Colorado snowy day, the way I like it,
is.
and sun always shows up again, which is kind of my attitude about being in the grand minority in the state legislature is the sun will shine again.
That is a great segue. So you were one of the bright spots. You did win your state Senate seat. You obviously served in the House previously. Thank you for your service in all those areas. But it was not the turnout that we had hoped. And right now in the state Senate, it's 23 Democrats to 12 Republicans.
Right.
Okay, what does that look like? What has that experience been? You now have had a couple of weeks. And what is the strategy going forward? Because that's a tough situation.
It is. It is very collegial in the Senate. My dear friend, our minority leader, Paul Lundeen, he's been telling me for the past couple of years, says you'll fit in better over here in the Senate chamber, and I feel like I kind of do, but. Everyone's been very kind and accommodating, and it is much more cordial. That's just kind of the whole air of it. There are 35 state senators as opposed to the 65 House members. It's much more raucous over in the other chamber, and just a lot quieter and a lot more, a lot more procedural and moves a slower pace. So, but to answer your question, when you coming in such a weak position, then you do, frankly, what I would like to think I would do if I were in the majority position, and that is to focus on the founding principles.
Yes.
I have 5 questions that I ask of myself for every bill. Is it constitutional? Does it reflect founding principles? And so on. And so I try to stick to that. We're not there to do what we're seeing most of the new members do, which is try to take over the world, but rather we're trying to execute good government that reflects founding principles.
Yeah, which is so key, because we talk about it a lot on my show. The only role of government, one role, is to protect the individual rights of its citizens. That's it. Not to tell us what to do, not to, try to micromanage and nanny state us to death. When you have a bill that comes along, you understand the founding principles, and we share that in common. How do you present that to someone on the other side of the aisle and say, this isn't constitutional? Do they seem to respond to that conversation? Because you ask yourself those questions, which are key. Yeah. They may see things a little bit different. There are many people on the Democrat side who think the Constitution, probably both state and federal, is a living, breathing document that really just hasn't kept up with the times. How do they respond when you ask them those questions or point that out?
What a wonderful question that you're asking, Deborah, because yeah, I'm even known for going down to the well, as we call it, the podium in front of the speaker's desk or the president of the Senate's desk, and I'll open up the Constitution and read that phrase from the Constitution that I'm objecting about to the bill. So, and I'll read the portion of the bill that's in conflict with that state or U.S. federal or U.S. Constitution, and my challenge to my fellow members always has been. If we are going to uphold our oath of office, we cannot vote for this bill because our oath of office, we just agree on one thing from the beginning, and that is that we will uphold the Constitution of the state of Colorado and the Constitution of the United States. And so when a bill is put forward that challenges that's in conflict, then I challenge them. I say, we cannot, and I got gavelled down once for doing that. Because I said, if you're going to vote for this bill, come down and renounce your oath of office first. And
I love
kind of
it.
And how do they react? Well, they deny it. And it's very shameful, frankly. But the famous one is one of my now was a fellow House member and now a fellow Senate member, Democrat, who the only argument was, I do not believe that I would be violating my oath of office when I vote for this bill. And so you think about these people coming in now, it's a massive difference. like 2/3 of the House in particular
Mm-hmm.
are new members.
Yeah.
It's a big change in people. And have you ever asked that question philosophically, what would I ever do if I knew I could not fail?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they come in with that attitude
Yeah.
because they have such a grand majority, supermajority in the House and almost a supermajority in the Senate. And then they have the governor's mansion, of course, as well. What would you do? And so, as you mentioned, a gun bill. Let's just get rid of guns in effect. Everything else that they're coming in thinking, well, we have the majority. We can pass all this stuff. And they don't even think about constitutionality. Or if they do, it's kind of a speed bump.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder how many of them have actually read the Constitution, either of the United States of America or Colorado, and understood, really given a thought, what is their job? Not to push forward whatever they want, but to adhere to the Constitution and to represent their constituents. It's interesting, the supermajority, it's weird for me to actually think this, but I've been saying that by the way, I'm just going to say you're that one extra vote we have in the state Senate that keeps it from being a supermajority, a veto-proof majority. Yep. We were talking about this because I think one of our only checks until we can retake seats may be the fact that Jared Polis has his eye on higher office, does not want to be seen as extreme. And if they had a veto-proof majority, I think they would just let him veto it and pass it again, because I've always heard that they're kind of at odds. He's not truly a libertarian. He's not truly a moderate. He just shoves it down to the bureaucratic state. Do you believe that? Because I see the smile on your face that believe it or not, might be Jared Polis's presidential aspirations may be the only check we have, because we have a veto-proof majority in the Senate by one seat, your seat.
That's right. It is my seat, so I will drive carefully on the way in.
There you go. I'm glad it's in the hands of someone who understands founding principles. And do be careful. We cannot afford to lose it. I think we should all pray for everyone in the Senate that
Yes.
on the Republican side, that no one falls away.
I'll take those prayers. You are so astute, Deborah. And yes, there's more than one dynamic that's working in our favor, but that's the biggest one. Is the backstop by the name of Governor Jared Polis.
Can you believe he's our backstop?
I know.
Desperate times, desperate measures.
But I do like the man. I've been spending some time with him. He's a comfortable person to be around, and so on. Obviously, we're very, very different philosophically in our backgrounds, our understanding of what the nation's supposed to be doing, how the Creator put us together.
Yes.
But yes, because of his probably presidential aspirations, that's kind of like the open secret in the Capitol, is that
the worst kept secret in Colorado.
Exactly. Is there are like 9 gun bills that are being floated right now, and the big one that you mentioned has not hit the pavement yet, and it may never. And the reason is because the governor will call in his leadership, in the legislature and say, do not let that get to my desk.
Yes.
And why? Because he doesn't want to go on record as having vetoed a bill that would make gun rules tighter, and he wouldn't want to anger those on the right who respect the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So yes, a lot of these things will just not even make it out of committee.
That's
Every
good.
bill gets its hearing. If it gets introduced, some of them, they might even scare them off from even introducing it. But that's another quick dynamic, though, is the more mature, the more senior legislators are very wary of all of these new, highly ambitious, less mature legislators that are coming in with their highfalutin ideas, how they want to change the world. And they're actually teaming together. One told me, and I won't mention her name, but an old friend, Democrat I've known for 4 years, said there are too many Democrats here. And we're having a hard time keeping them from just really going off the rails and making us look terrible.
Well, I think that's interesting here. I'm glad to know that there's still some Democrats like that under the dome, because while I do believe that we need a period of really pulling back government, which will happen federally, would happen long before it's going to happen in Colorado, where under Republican leadership, hopefully we can really take the step to pull back government. That would be the process. It only happened under the Republican Party, and they haven't always been great at it. Yes. But generally, if we were back to the state in which we were found, it is good to have bipartisanship. It really, anytime you have monolithic one-party rule, that is an issue. What percentage do you think, let's say in the state Senate, for instance, or maybe the House, are these more senior Democrats that realize the incoming folks are so radical, they're just ready to step away from any traditional role of government?
In the Senate, it's a much higher percentage of maturity that's there, that we won't see the radical bills coming out of the Senate so much.
Yes.
So I'll say that the more mature Democrats in the Senate, I'm going to say that's probably a 60-70% of them. On the House, it's going, the more mature folks are probably 25% of them.
Thank goodness for our bicameral approach. Thank goodness there actually is a Senate and a House, which is on the federal level why it was so troubling to see the push to end the filibuster and basically annihilate the role of the Senate. Because, it's always fun to watch on TV, but we really do not want to become the British parliamentary where everybody's just screaming at each other and nothing really happens. Although if nothing happened, that might be okay. I think the less that actually gets through would be good. Well, it's interesting. We're going to head to a break here and come back, but I want to ask you about one of those. Another bill that was actually pulled, at least it hasn't gone to committee. It was supposed to go to committee. It was pulled, is something to do with education. It is HB 23-1003. And what it would have said, it's in the House, but there's also Senator Cutter was a sponsor. It would have allowed children as young as 12, if their parents opted out of that health survey. Now, anyone who's seen that health survey knows it's incredibly invasive. It's asking children all the way down into elementary school, things about their sexuality, about their suicide, about their mental health, all of this. Parents can opt out of that because that becomes a database that completely robs privacy. There was a bill that was supposed to go to committee this week that would have allowed children as young as 12 to go ahead and do it, even if their parents said they couldn't, and then lie to their parents, basically. That got pulled. I don't know if you have any insight on it, but that to me shows some moderation, that maybe those more senior people realize that that's a little radical.
So I have heard about that bill. It's actually consistent with things that they have passed and pressed before. So you can get psychological treatment at your school. A student can, without informing the parents, and all gender reassignment and all that stuff that can happen. This is where we've really gone off the rails. It's no longer education. It's a whole new societal. I don't know what would you call that, but this whole institution,
statism.
It's not statism, but it's gone way beyond education. And I keep saying, boy, this is what makes us all say we should not send our children to government schools. This is the problem. We never should have allowed the government to run the schools and to provide instruction in the first place. That was one of the big mistakes of the nation. And it's a shame that we're here. But this is what will happen when the government runs an institution. Then all the philosophical things come in and they say, let's take advantage, let's leverage this. We have their children for several hours. Let's mold them in our image. So it's shameful.
And it is. And I think it's interesting because even Democrats, I would hope, who are more, common sense, that are not so radically ideologically driven, even if they're for transitioning, the idea that you would shut the parents out of something that is so absolutely huge in a child's life, or if they're suicidal, etc. Well, we'll get into more of what you're focusing on in the Senate, as well as something that's happening today in a committee hearing, which is a license plate "In God We Trust." So we're going to talk about that when we come back, as well as what you see coming down the pike and what you're working on under the dome in Denver. So when we come back, we're going to continue with State Senator Mark Baisley, the Under the Dome in Denver update. We'll just call it that for today. Don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS, sitting in for George Brauchler. Great. Thank you. Welcome back to The George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler, who is somewhere serving our country around the world. Good to be here. Hope that you are having a wonderful start to your week. I'm continuing my conversation with State Senator Mark Baisley. We have been talking about what it's like now to be in the state Senate versus his time serving in the House of Representatives. Good to know. And we confirmed this last week that we do have a veto-proof majority by one seat in the state Senate, meaning Jared Polis, with political aspirations, hopefully will veto anything that comes down the pike that is too crazy, because he wouldn't have the cover of vetoing something and then being able to pass it. And since we only have a one seat cushion, we need to pray for all of the Republican state senators in particular, including Mark Baisley. I'm counting him as the one extra. Mark, thanks for continuing on the show with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Deborah. Such an honor to be here.
Great. Well, we were talking before the break. You are always so great and understand the Constitution, the role of the representative, which is the oath to the Constitution, bringing that up on the founding principles and how you bring that up in the state Senate. If anyone's just tuning in, please go to the website 710knus.com. You can hear what we were talking about in the last segment, as well as the first hour of the show. We're continuing on with Mark, and we're going to be talking about something that's happening today. We're going to talk about a couple things that have to do with the principles of what government is supposed to do and not do. But Mark, I want to ask you, what are you focused on right now? You're introducing some legislation that has to do with 14ers, and really that has to do with the Colorado way of life. Can you talk about that?
Yes. In this, I went from representing two counties, Douglas and Teller counties, to in the House, to now representing 8 counties. And so it goes all the way from Franktown to Leadville, and from just south, like about 1,000 feet south of the Red Rocks Amphitheater, all the way down to West Cliff, which is south of the Royal Gorge Bridge. So this is a big chunk of land.
And it's beautiful. My heart goes out to you that you have to be there.
I'm telling you, no, you're right. As I drive,
it's gorgeous.
And I get a lot of windshield time, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And I ask myself, why didn't I just do this before? Now I have to, and I'm so pleased that I have to drive all this. It's so gorgeous.
And one quick aside, when I was running for the state, for the U.S. Senate, traveling around this state, I grew up here, but I saw portions I had never seen before. And I thanked God literally every day that I was running in Colorado and not in Pennsylvania next to the smokestacks or something like that. Hey, great people in Pennsylvania, but there's something beautiful and unique about Colorado. So now you represent this much larger territory. So what did that lead you to get engaged in?
I approached my new pals of county commissioners in these 6 new counties from me, and asked them, what can I do for you guys? And 3 of my 5 bills this year came from those county commissioners. And so one of them, the one I'm most excited about, is access across private property to get to those 14ers, the 14,000 foot peaks and rivers and campgrounds and great hiking opportunities and visuals, all of that, all those things that make Colorado. And what had happened was, starting as far as I can research, back about 1969, statute was created that limited the liability of private property owners who would allow access across their property to get to these great sites. Now, some of these property owners, they own tens of thousands of acres. Some actually own some 14,000 foot peaks.
Wow.
Yeah.
You want that for Christmas, right?
yes, no kidding.
Under your tree.
Yes. And they've been so gracious for all these years in allowing people to just come right across their property. They want people to be able to enjoy Colorado as what makes Colorado, as you just described. But they don't want the liability of, what if someone breaks their leg and they get these, sue the property owner because they broke their leg? Well, all was going pretty well, and there were some adjustments to the statute over the years. But just a couple of years ago, someone did successfully sue a property owner. It was the United States Air Force Academy. A guy had ridden his bicycle across on the path, made his way onto the academy uninvited, and was just enjoying the bike path, and steered off of it and fell down into a hole and was injured. And but so all these property owners kept an eye on this case, where he was awarded $7.3 million.
Oh, my goodness.
So property owner just said, well, then no more access across my property, which is a heartbreak, right?
Yeah.
We had such a great thing going for decades. So the bill that I have introduced and getting a lot of attention is to limit the liability a little bit more than it is, because the way they were able to find that one chink in the armor in the current statute language allowing this $7 million award. If we can get this passed, and I did talk with the governor about it, he's very open to it. He liked the bill idea. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of Democrats are liking it, but they're concerned about their biggest donor, who is the trial lawyers. So
why does that not surprise me? It's
yeah.
like Planned Parenthood, teachers unions, and the trial lawyers.
Oh, you got it. That's the trifecta. Exactly that.
Is.
I actually met with the trial lawyers. They came to my office last week, and we had a very constructive conversation. It's actually one of Dan Kaplas's friends or colleagues there. So we had a very constructive conversation, and I think we're going to get there. I'm hoping that everybody signs it. I hope that I get good sponsorship from the other side. No one's been willing to sign on yet, but they all want to, but they're concerned. Anyway, so I get it. So I just hope they just vote for it. And that will open things back up again and alleviate I'll tell you, those property owners, I could just hug them, because they're willing to invest in putting up signs, and they gain nothing from this. And people do, they'll do a lot of littering and damaging and shooting of signs and shooting of trees and all that, but they still think it's worth it. So,
you know what I like about this, Mark, is we were talking in the first segment about the founding principles. What is the role of government? When I was running for U.S. Senate, people would ask, what bills you're going to pass? I'm like, I really would like to see less legislation, not more, although there are certain things that need to be passed. But this is exactly the kind of thing that should, because it's basically limiting the liability of individual citizens who are being generous, helping those who, on their own volition go into those areas, take responsibility, protecting the rights of citizens. So I think this is really good. It's nice to see there's something that people can hopefully come around if they're not too beholden, meaning the Democrats, to those trial lawyer donors. And if for some reason it doesn't get through, I want to know so we can talk about who voted against it, because we've got to keep people liable for that. Another thing that makes total and complete sense is what's happening today. In December, I believe it was on my show, which is heard Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. Tune in. We had John Preco on the show, and he is a wonderful individual, United States Air Force Colonel, retired B-1 and B-52 bomber pilot, who saw that in, I think it's 24 states, there is a license plate that simply says, "In God We Trust." Now, you think this wouldn't be a big deal to introduce this, because there's hundreds of other license plates, especially license plates in Colorado, including for, I think we said, stegosauruses and pollinators and all of these sorts of things. And this introduction of this license plate based on the U.S. motto,
that's right.
It's certainly constitutional. No money, from my understanding, would go to individuals. This is just providing something. Last time in the legislature, it was stalled out or killed, however you want to put it. So today, you're one of the sponsors, and there's a hearing. We'll talk about that in a moment. Can you first of all tell us what happened last year? Because this should be a no-brainer when, that's the motto of the United States. At least 70% of Coloradans or Americans profess to be Christians or deists of some sort. So tell us what happened last year, first of all.
So, our rights come from our Creator, right? So let's recognize the Creator. Let's allow people to express that on a license plate. It's not mandatory. It would go on every license plate, just whoever chose to pay that extra $50 to get that license plate. What happened last year, and it was this time last year that I introduced that as a House bill, and it passed just fine out of committee, but because it has a financial piece to it where the state will have to set aside money, but it will be a money maker for the state. But the state has to set aside money to make the license plate in the first place. Then people pay $50 and it will very quickly, we will be in the red on it.
I think very quickly.
In the black, I'm sorry, but yes, very quickly. Yes. Anyway, but because it has a fiscal note, as they say it, then it had to go through Appropriations Committee. Well, the Appropriations Committee chair, who is now running for mayor of Denver.
Which one is this?
This is Leslie Herod.
Okay.
Representative Herod was the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and she stalled it out. So there were, I think, 6 other license plate bills that she allowed to go through all at once. And I kept asking her, when's my license plate bill going to come up? Because I introduced it early on, and it went for months. It was sitting there in appropriations, and she wasn't bringing it up. So she finally, she let all the others go through. This one she brought through on the very last day, which meant that it did not have time to make it through the Senate afterwards. So it died on the calendar, as they say. The real irony in here is she voted for it. She's on record as having voted for it. So it passed out of the House and then died on the calendar. I called her up when I was reintroducing it this year, and I said, Leslie, this is your moment to get right with God and co-prime sponsor this license plate bill with me. And she politely declined.
Wow, that's not really surprising. Was any reason given for sitting on it until it died?
Oh, just a smirk.
That's just crazy. Yeah. All of these others go through. This is why this is important. Some people may think, why are we talking about a license plate? But the reality is, it's just an example of how government under the dome is not representing everyone. Whether, even if somebody sitting in that committee was an atheist or even, hostile towards the U.S. motto, you're still representing an entire state of people. And why would you not let this one go through? So tell us what's happening today.
You know what? A real quick aside, John Prieco, and we appreciate Colonel Prieco so much. I was able to take him along with, give all the credit to Representative Kurt Huffman, who's my chief of staff and was in the House and now in the Senate. And he arranged for us to have a tour of the prison in my district in Canyon City that makes those license plates. And so we had John, and we all walked through and saw how the license plates were all made. And by the way, the inmates there are so appreciative of having new license plates to make. It gets boring stamping out the same thing all the time. And they're going, they said, thank you for creating this new In God We Trust. We can't wait to design it. They have graphic design, everything else. And anyway, it's a real opportunity for them to learn skills and all that for all the good reasons. So it's good for everybody, I think. Right now we've put it through. It's going to get heard today, this afternoon in committee, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. John will be there. A lot of witnesses coming, and we'll appreciate if anybody shows up to testify in favor of it. There's also a petition. If you go to my website, markbaisley.com, or my Facebook page, Mark Baisley, then you can find how to sign the petition.
I think that's great. And if anyone wants to go, the hearing is today beginning at 1:30 p.m. in the Senate Committee Room 352. I believe it is still there, but if you go to the Dome, to the Capitol building before 1:30 p.m., you can be heard to testify for this. And is this the stage that it never got to last year until the very last day? Are we ahead of schedule this time around?
You know what? It was coming from the House side. So it was a House bill last year. It's a Senate bill this year, since I'm carrying it both times and now in the other chamber. And so it will have to go through the same process on the other side. However, God bless her, my good old friend Leslie Herod is not in control of appropriations. She's not the chair of appropriations this year. I do have some wonderful House support in Shannon Byrd, who I just adore, Democrat on the other side, very business-oriented person. She chairs the committee that it will hear it in the House. And I think it will get through just fine this year. That's my hope anyway.
Good. Well, I'm so glad to hear that, and I appreciate it. The fact is, sometimes it's the smaller things. This is not a small thing, but some people can think of that as a license plate, are so important because it's where we can call people on their skewed view, not representing all Coloradans, holding something up. And it's something that, therefore, it's important to take these stands, especially as we're working towards the next election to hopefully get a little bit more wiggle room than a one vote buffer against a veto proof majority in this state Senate. So
looks to God's ears.
Absolutely. Well, we hope people do show up today, 1:30 p.m. You can testify at the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee for the In God We Trust license plate. And I have to do one little disclaimer here because, I do have a little nepotism. Unbeknownst to all of us, it was actually my brother who designed it. I don't know.
No
Steve Ricks
kidding.
is actually my brother.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And he designed it. He's a graphic designer. A lot of people don't know that. He kept that quiet when he was meeting with Kurt Huffman and Colonel Prieco and all of that, because, you know, when he earns things on his own merit. He's very talented, and he was honored to do it because it's obviously the core of who he is. So small world. And yes, I am biased. I admit it. I think it's beautiful.
I will get you a copy of it.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
I'm going to be one of the first ones to sign up for it.
Okay.
So we're going to be heading to a break. Thank you so much for coming in, Mark. I really appreciate it. And I was joking a little bit about praying for y'all, but many of us are. Yeah, even though we want to make sure no one on the Republican side in the Senate has an untimely demise, so we keep our veto-proof majority.
Well, I feel every prayer. Thank you so much.
You got it.
It's an honor to meet with you here.
You too. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for what you do and keeping a smile on your face in the midst of all of that. Well, when we come back, we'll continue. We want to take your calls as well. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. Also hearing from listeners on our free 710 KNUS app. Look forward to hearing from you. Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS.
I'll wrap it up for you so you can get back to the show. But the volatility, like we've seen to start 2023, is never comfortable. But it does create some opportunity for investors. So make sure you're evaluating your plan. We think in a more active favor than passive favor at this point in the year. Again, there are some opportunities out there, but we will keep our eye on things. And if anyone would like some custom advice or have their personal questions answered, then just call the office. We'll see what we can do.
Yes.
And thanks again for stepping in, Deborah.
You got it, Amy. And boy, with what's going on, with all these layoffs, with the uncertainty, it's why your work and your updates and Alpine Planning Group is so important. We appreciate it. And by the way, just like you were kind enough to say that you listen to me, I listen to the updates and the input that all of you have with Alpine Planning Group. So it's good to connect. And I do want to share with listeners that Alpine Planning Group is a comprehensive financial planning firm committed to improving your long-term financial success. Investing is a matter of trust, and they are prepared to earn yours. So call them today at 303-843-0918. That's 303-843-0918, Alpine Planning Group. Amy, thank you so much for being on the show today and giving us that insight and letting us know that you guys are there to help us through these times. I really appreciate it.
Hey, have a good day. Stay warm.
You too. Thank you
Securities
so
and
much.
Investment advisory services offered through Woodbury Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC and registered investment advisor. Alpine Planning Group and Woodbury Financial Services, Inc. are not affiliated entities. 14 West Dry Creek Circle, Littleton, Colorado, 80120.
Well, that was Alpine Planning Group, Amy Duncan. Thank you so much, Amy, for calling in with that. I tell you, I know my strengths and my weaknesses. And when it comes to what's going on in the economy, I'm grateful there are people like Amy and Alpine Planning Group, because there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And as she was saying, we're going to see a lot about what's going on with corporate earnings this week, especially with all the layoffs. There is a lot happening in the financial world that is kind of crazy, kind of up and down. I shared that on my show this past week about, the state of the state, the state of the union, the things that really were covered by Jared Polis and things that were not. And it's interesting to see that in the state of the state, there's some things that are kind of alarming and why we need to pay attention to what's going on. We were looking at, the situation going on. We know with reaching the debt limit, we're going to have Congressman Ken Buck coming on at 9 o'clock. We're going to talk about the negotiations that are going on with Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden right now, because the White House wants no conditions in raising the debt level. And finally, it seems that there is going to be someone standing strong, probably partly because the House of Representatives, there is now a lot of, strength to other voices. There is not the wiggle room to continue business as usual. So that's going to continue. But right here in Colorado, I just want to share one thing with you when we're thinking about the financial picture. We know that it's tough around different places. We know that Jared Polis talked about the state of the state, but it is interesting to note this. I serve on a few boards, and one we were looking at the financial picture for those who are in the most challenging situation right here in Colorado. A lot of people look at the federal poverty level. Now, the problem with the federal poverty level, the way that they rate it, it does not include health care or childcare. Particularly, childcare is needed for people to go to work. So MIT has come up with a better marker in some ways. It's called the living wage, not to be confused with how it's used to argue for higher minimum wage that oftentimes ends jobs and closes businesses, which makes it all the much harder. But a living wage is what someone needs to earn to meet basic necessities. It's outrageous and astonishing to find that in Denver, according to MIT, people far smarter than I am in crunching numbers, in Denver, family of four needs $116,000 to make ends meet. That's two working parents. We are worse than New York or Los Angeles. Something to think about. Well, we're heading to a break. When we come back, we're going to have Alliance Defending Freedom's Ryan Tucker to talk about a big win for religious liberty. Let's talk about some good news when we come back. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome to The George Show. You probably guessed in these first couple of seconds, I'm not George Brauchler. This is Deborah Flora sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. Today, my show, which is heard weekdays 3 to 4 p.m., Jimmy Sangenberger will be sitting in. We're kind of having, the Chinese fire drill in our chairs, but it's good to be here with you this morning. Already going quickly, Billy in the booth, and we are moving right along. Well, want to always share some good news. That's one of the things that I always want to do in my show or when I'm sitting in, because there is good news. There are beachheads in our governmental system. And one of those is the Supreme Court. And one of those organizations that has repeatedly access the judicial system to stand up for our rights. And I always say I'm not a litigious person by nature, but honestly, when many of the other guardrails, such as the media, are not doing their jobs, that is where we are. It is there to be used to make sure that laws are constitutional and do not overstep their bounds. Well, Alliance Defending Freedom is a great organization that does that, not charging a dime for their clients. And I'm really glad to have with me today Ryan Tucker. He's the Alliance Defending Freedom Senior Legal Counsel who oversees all efforts to maintain and defend the constitutionally protected freedoms of churches, Christian ministries, and religious schools to exercise their First Amendment. This is really where we are seeing in a complex society with different rights coming together. That's where we're seeing one of the largest battles is the rights of religious institutions to protect and individuals their First Amendment rights. Well, there has been a very big win recently that Ryan is going to share with you, as well as some other things that are going on. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Deborah.
You got it. Absolutely. Well, we have a lot of bad news, but there's a lot of good news coming particularly out of the judicial system and what Alliance Defending Freedom is doing. I want to talk about one of those cases right now, which is Hunter versus the U.S. Department of Education. Why don't you tell our listeners the basic part of that case and what has just occurred with it?
Sure, happy to. This is a lawsuit that was filed by an LGBT activist group on behalf of some current and former college students. And what they were seeking was really to prevent any student from using tuition grants, student loans, any sort of federal financial assistance at schools that operate according to Christian beliefs on sexuality. So what they did was they filed a lawsuit a couple years ago in federal court in Oregon, really in an effort to punish these religious schools and their students merely for holding on and living out those widely accepted religious teachings. We had some briefing done in the case. We had a 3-day long hearing in the case. Finally, just recently, we learned that the district court in Oregon, of all places, issued a dismissal, summarily dismissing every single claim that was brought by those plaintiffs. And the reason this is a big victory is this lawsuit would have really slammed the door to most students who were looking to pursue higher education at religious colleges and universities. So it's quite a big victory.
Yeah, well, and I so appreciate you doing that because this really hits home for us. I mean, our son is going to be going to college next year. He was recruited to play football at a Christian institution. And because of, different financial packages, he's able to attend. And what I find interesting about this is, it doesn't seem to be from some of the activists, this idea of live and let live, you pursuing your own individual idea of happiness. One group of students trying to prevent another group of students from going to a school that upholds their beliefs. I mean, you don't see that in reverse. If I'm correct, Ryan, some of this has to do with Title IX and really a misinterpretation. Am I correct? And can you highlight that?
That's absolutely right. Title IX is a federal law that generally forbids differential treatment based on sex. Importantly, though, that prohibition does not apply to religious educational institutions if it conflicts with their religious tenets. And there's ongoing efforts by the administration to, in essence, change that definition. And so without that protection, then these religious institutions are susceptible to attacks like this. And, as you mentioned, I mean, it's big enough for religious schools and secular schools, both
Yes.
public and private, to coexist. And simply denying students access to the college of their choice by, stripping federal funding from students who choose religious schools is just flat out discriminatory and wrong.
Yeah, it really is, and I think it's always great to point out, as, ADF does, this is for people of many religious faiths, whether it's
That's right.
Muslim, Jewish, Christian, most of the major world religions have a certain view on, cultural topics such as, sexuality, gender, etc. So this isn't just, Christians versus LGBTQ.
That's right.
This is a vast majority of people in the United States.
That's
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, this impacts everyone, every faith, even those that don't have it. I mean, people, regardless of what your faith is, shouldn't have to fall in line with whatever the government mandated orthodoxy is, or suffer the penalties. And so this really is a victory for all of those that either share those beliefs or don't. We just shouldn't have to fall in line with whatever the government decides on that particular day.
Yeah, absolutely. When the government decides what's permissive and what is not, we've really stepped beyond the Rubicon, so to speak, and protecting individual liberty. The fact that this case was ruled favorably for Constitution in Oregon is very encouraging. What's the makeup of that court? And do you see that as a victory, that perhaps this message is finally coming down to the most activist areas in our country, that just hands off, you can't keep persecuting those who maybe believe differently? Is that something you see when this was in Oregon, of all places?
Yeah, it obviously was. We're thrilled that the district court in Oregon. This was a Clinton appointee. She's been on the bench for a number of years, but perhaps through that time on the bench, she's seen a fair number of cases, plenty of cases without merit, and she ruled that this one clearly did not have the merit. In her order, she made very clear that a number of the arguments that the plaintiffs were making were confusing and contradictory, and they simply didn't have a right to be in court. Now, just because we won a district court of Oregon doesn't mean this case is entirely over. The plaintiffs have indicated that they're going to be appealing it to the Ninth Circuit, and so we'll just have to wait and see, but we're very confident about our position in this case.
Well, especially after, if I'm correct, recently the Supreme Court held in Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue that the government can't discriminate against religious schools when it comes to funding. I mean, this was decided in the Supreme Court. Do you think that when it goes to the next level, because to me, and granted, I'm not the lawyer here, this is kind of relitigating that same point again. Am I correct? And do you think the Ninth Circuit might take that into consideration if they choose to take or not take this case?
Yeah, I do. I feel very confident based on the way the court's been going, from the case you mentioned out of Montana from a couple of years ago. Even prior to that, Trinity Lutheran case was a case that ADF argued at the U.S. Supreme Court. The court's been very clear that you can't single out religious individuals for discriminatory treatment. We've seen that in a number of cases that have reached the court over the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm quite confident that if this case were to make it there, that it would be favorable for us.
Without a doubt. I mean, and it's you're talking about other cases right here in Colorado. We seem to be ground zero for individuals on this situation with Jack Phillips and Lori Smith, which we talked about and had them on my program previously. So, it does seem to be something that they've ruled on. We're hoping in the case of Lori Smith, they rule on it in a broader level than they did with Jack Phillips, but even beyond, schools, which was what I think the Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, that was a school funding issue. Government can't discriminate against religious schools when it comes to funding. This also is hitting religious organizations. And I know many churches, and this affects mosques and temples who, could eventually be held into an illegal stance if this goes so far as to say they don't have religious liberty in how they operate. You were involved with a case called Wyoming Rescue Mission. Can you tell us about how this intersects there when now this is I believe, a nonprofit ministry also being attacked on the basis of religious liberty or against religious liberty?
Yeah, that's right. The Wyoming Rescue Mission has served the people of Casper, Wyoming, for almost 40 years. They provide free meals to the community, shelter the homeless, recovery programs. They're involved in a lot of different areas. The shelter that they operate is mainly in part funded through, they have these thrift stores called Rescue Treasures. And so individuals come in and are able to, buy some of the goods there, and the money goes all the way back into the ministry itself. Well, they had an individual apply to work at one of these thrift stores. And when she applied, she was a self-proclaimed non-Christian, an atheist. She couldn't sign on to their statement of beliefs. And not surprisingly, the mission looked at that and said, well, if you can't sign on to our beliefs, if you don't agree with really what we stand for, we're going to move on to the next candidate. Well, she wasn't happy about that decision. So she turned around and filed a complaint with the state and said that the mission was discriminating against them. Well, the state law in Wyoming, as well as federal law, includes an exemption for religious institutions, religious organizations like this. But the state officials, as well as the EEOC, decided not to enforce that exemption, and instead went after the mission itself for simply standing on its own faith. And clearly, these religious institutions like the mission, they must be able to decide, who it is they're bringing on, how they share their faith. Because if you are not able to hire like-minded individuals, then the core of the organization will simply fall apart. It'll crumble. And fortunately here, after we unfortunately had to file a federal lawsuit, both the state and federal officials capitulated. So I'm happy to report that we scored a victory there in the District of Wyoming as well.
I think that's great. I mean, it's something where for too long, those who've kind of been having they have been having the intimidation of lawsuits, and it seems to be in one direction, haven't stood. And if we don't stand, this will continue. I also find it very interesting, the intent of people who keep suing these organizations. When you were talking about what the Wyoming Rescue Mission does and these epidemics of homelessness, I was reading that they provided over 41,000 beds for men, women, and children in crisis. That's just a good thing. For someone to sue when they could work at Goodwill or anywhere else, I just always wonder, why would someone want to work somewhere where they don't agree with the mission behind it? That's the part that gets me.
Yeah, it really makes no sense. I mean, whether you're looking at this case, like you mentioned, where, someone's purposely trying to go in and has the even stated position often of trying to change the belief system of the organization they're trying to be employed with, or even in the case we just talked about with the schools, where the activist group that brought that case, their governing organization over them, their mission is to quote unquote sabotage Christian supremacy, which in their mind means Christian beliefs about biblical sexuality. So a lot of these organizations that are bringing these cases, that are setting up these plaintiffs to file these lawsuits, obviously have an underlying agenda. But I'm so thankful for the shelter in this instance, the schools. There were 3 religious schools that we brought the Hunter case on behalf of. And so we're just thankful that these institutions are standing up for their rights.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it takes people of courage. I mean, we've had, like I said, Jack Phillips and Lori Smith on, and, people that are willing to stand up. When you're talking about the targeting, Jack Phillips, 10 years this has been going on, and it's so clearly targeted. I mean, the very day or day after, around that week when the Supreme Court said that he was unfairly targeted because of his religious faith, somewhere right around that period, someone targeted him again, asked him to make a cake that had, blue or pink on the inside, a gender fluidity cake. It's just interesting to see, and we need to be clear about it, because, what I appreciate the Alliance Defending Freedom does stands up for the rights of everyone to live freely. There's no Christian supremacy where Christians are trying to tell everyone else they have to go to church. They have to shop, at these thrift stores. They have to buy a cake or cookies from Jack Phillips. No, there is so many other options here. And it's time we get back to that common ground of understanding in a complex society we can all live together. Those bumper stickers that say coexist. Well, let's try that, and as we've said, this is for Muslim organizations, Jewish organizations, Christian organizations. There's one last case I want you to talk about because there have been wins in the Wyoming rescue mission case, which is great. Wyoming, I guess, dropped that from what I understand. An Oregon court ruled in favor of religious liberty in the education case, Hunter versus U.S. Department of Education. From my understanding, there's an ongoing case now, Sacred Heart of Jesus Parish versus Nestle. Can you tell us about that? Not surprisingly in Michigan, which has hardly been a bastion of individual liberty lately. What is that case so we can keep an eye on it?
Yeah. Michigan, unfortunately, has been dealing with a lot. But
yes.
They have a state law that was recently reinterpreted really by their highest court, the Michigan Supreme Court. And what they did was they looked at the definition of sex in their non-discrimination law and really issued a bad opinion. And that's now had a trickle-down effect to a number of religious organizations within the state. And in essence, right now, based on what that reinterpretation means, it could force all schools, all religious schools to comply with this redefinition of sex, which means, they may have to deal with employment related complaints, just like we mentioned in Wyoming. Individuals that come in and say, I don't affirm your belief system. If they say no, now are they subject to possible complaint there? If a child struggling with gender identity issues comes in and says, well, I want you to refer to me with certain pronouns. If the school declines to do that, then they also will be subject to these penalties under state law. So it's a scenario where these religious institutions, they're not exempt under the law.
Yeah.
So they're left with an impossible choice. They either deny their core beliefs or they're simply shut down.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You just said they are not exempt according to Michigan law, but they are exempt according to the Constitution of the United States of America. That's where the rub is and why so much of this is going to the Supreme Court. I got a notice, and I don't know if this impacts it, but late Friday, December 30th, I think it was, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals published an opinion that I think was in Adams versus School Board of St. Johns County, holding that the school did not have to allow, and this is a school, these are minors, those that are biologically of a certain sex to go into bathrooms of the other biological sex. Does that impact anything that you are dealing with currently? Because that was out of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah, great question. These great opinions that come out of differing circuits, they do have an impact.
Good.
So the 11th Circuit is not where Michigan is located. Michigan is in the 6th, but you can point to these other cases as sort of building blocks, if you will. And whenever you have a disagreement amongst the circuits, so if the 9th were to say something and the 6th says something different, that's usually, of course, when the U.S. Supreme Court decides to step in and answer ultimately the question. But you're absolutely right. These wins, these victories. I know that, like you said, a lot of our listeners are hearing on a day in and day out basis a lot of bad things, but there are a lot of good things happening too. And that's just another example. And this case is early on in Michigan. We're waiting right now for briefing to conclude, and then we'll likely have a hearing coming up here in the spring. But we're looking forward to righting the wrong there in Michigan.
Yeah, boy, I sure hope so. And if they rule differently, it'll be interesting to see if this goes once again to the Supreme Court. And maybe it needs to, because, it seems like there seem to keep being these attacks, and especially when it comes to, children. You're talking about someone who's a biological male and 14-year-old girls being showered, forced to shower next to them, when there are common sense solutions. If someone's, dealing with gender fluidity issues, you can have a individual area, and where that's been proposed in some places, others have, fought back against that. So, well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Ryan. It is a bright spot. It is a beachhead, as I talk about on my show a lot. Here's the last thing I want to ask. I've previously not been a very litigious person, but I really think the courts are where we need to take things more and more. What would you say to anyone that is dealing right now, whether they're running a religious nonprofit, they're part of a religious school, maybe they're a pastor, or they're in a mosque or a Jewish temple? What would you say to them? Because many are retreating in fear of litigation, pulling back from spaces where they should be able to operate, such as, adoption agencies or other things like that, or thrift stores, as in Wyoming. What would you say to anyone right now that is facing that, and what should they do?
Well, first off, they need to take a stand. I know that's easier said than done, but the reality is if they don't, then, the script is really already written, right? I think that it's so important not just to simply allow the stalwarts like Jack Phillips and these schools I mentioned to be out there. But I do think there's value in stepping forth. And, as we've talked about, there are so many instances of great victories going on along the United States. This isn't a scenario where, I just don't want to do it because I know what's going to happen. The reality is, the Constitution still reigns supreme, and there's so many great judges out there, and there's judges even in rougher areas of the country that are making the right judgment call. So I would encourage them to do that. They can reach out to ADF at adflegal.org, and they can fill out a request there. We're happy to take a look at their situation, and if for some reason we can't help them, we always try to point folks in the right direction.
I think that's great. I just got this flash of the old Uncle Sam, wanted poster. We want you. I mean, we need people of character, courage, and standing to take a stand so that this, trampling on individual liberty and religious liberty and, conscience exceptions, etc., stops once and for all. But it seems like it's gaining steam in that direction, especially because of the great work of Alliance Defending Freedom. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, and I appreciate all you're doing. Keep us posted so we can stay updated and keep people updated.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. Well, that was my guest, Ryan Tucker of Alliance Defending Freedom, Senior Legal Counsel, talking about the wins. We got to talk about the wins because they are happening. And really, this is a time more than ever where we have to have courage to take a stand. And like I said, this stand is for people who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are Christian, who are atheist. What happened with Jack Phillips, by the way, that also is standing up for the right of an atheist baker to not have to bake a cake with scripture on it if they don't want to, which, by the way, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission said they didn't have to. It was just in one direction. But this is an important right for every single person. Well, when we come back, we are going to open up the phone lines 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. Want to know what's on your mind this Monday morning. I'm also going to talk about, when we come back, living courageously. The day of just saying, be safe, bubble wrap yourself, stay away from any harm. I think that's pretty much done, and many of you are living courageously. So I'm going to tell a really inspiring story of someone I think you all know, but definitely exemplified this spirit. Don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome to the Deborah Flora Show. Sorry, this is actually the George Brauchler Show. I need more coffee. Deborah Flora sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. My show heard every day, Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. Jimmy Sangenberger sitting in for me today as I'm sitting in for George, who is somewhere in the world serving our country right now. Thank you, George, for that. Well, we have had a great show already. Hard to believe it's already 8:30 a.m. If you missed any of the show, go to our website, 710knus.com, and you can hear the podcast. You can hear the podcast from my shows as well. We had Mark Baisley in the studio. He's state senator, talking about what's going on under the dome in Denver and how, thank goodness, we do have a one seat veto-proof majority in the Senate. Now, that is a Democrat majority. However, the reason why that is good is because one of our backstops, as Mark and I were talking about, is actually Jared Polis himself, who wants to appear to be a moderate or a libertarian, even though he simply pushes things down to the bureaucratic state level, so his fingers aren't on it. But that is a good thing. We were talking about that, some bills that are going on, things to be aware of. Then in the last segment, we just had Alliance Defending Freedom's Senior Legal Counsel Ryan Tucker on the show to talk about good news. Isn't it nice to talk about good news? Well, there is good news of some wins, even out of Oregon, in the cases of religious liberty. And as we talked about, this isn't just for Christians, it is for Muslims, for Jewish folks, for people of every faith, or atheists, to be able to live freely according to their own views. Well, I want to talk about something else now because, I married into Ohio football fanship. If you ever listen to my show, I cheer for the Buckeyes. I always cheer for the Broncos first. And then after that, my second pro team is the Bengals. So congratulations to the Bengals. My husband was very happy to see the situation with the game. But, it led me to think about something that many of you are aware of, the whole Damar Hamlin situation, what happened to him on the field. And the reality is I take that personally because our son plays football. I have held my breath sometimes on the sidelines. But what I'm going to get to at the heart of this is living a life of courage and avoiding what is taken hold of much of our culture was this risk-free fantasy that somehow you can live your life risk-free. Now, fortunately, football has come a long way, the way that players are taught to tackle, the equipment, all of that. But it didn't take long, by the way, after Damar Hamlin's incident that took so much center stage because people watched it live. I mean, how many thousands of people were watching the moment that happened? Well, it didn't take long for, as we know, the cultural elite to begin to take on football itself and made it political. Here's a clip of Joy Behar right after it happened.
So 45% of Americans think that tackle football is appropriate. Wow. Heterosexual men voted the most support for kids doing football. Mm-hmm. And conservatives were more likely to support youth tackle football. Just saying.
Just saying. It doesn't take long for the cultural elite to politicize pretty much anything. But what they're getting at the heart of is, is it just too dangerous to play? Now, here's the thing about sports like football is, our son likes it. We like it. It has trained a lot of people and a lot of character because it's a team sport, because people work together. Now, I don't want to, park on that. What I'm getting to is, I think it's time we all shake off the dust of what happened right after COVID. Everyone of goodwill for the first few months was like, okay, let's be super careful because we don't know what this is. 2 months to flatten the curve has now become 3 years to flatten our freedom. I used to say 2 years, but we're going on the third year now. And at the heart of it is this. I saw this as a mom beginning when our kids were small. I called it the bubble wrap generation. Somehow parents of my generation began to think that there would be a way to raise children where there is a risk-free environment with no possible consequences. First of all, it's not reality. Secondly, it's not good for building character. Third, it absolutely robs all of us from living life to the fullest. I want to give a quick analogy. So we were up in Grand Lake with our family not very long ago, and we went snowmobiling, skiing, tubing, sledding, had a blast, all of which could be looked at as high risk, but awesome nonetheless. And what was ironic about that is if the goal is to absolutely never, ever get hurt, if the goal is to not die, then you don't really live. So after doing that, you know where I ended up getting hurt? In the parking lot. We were walking to our car. I slipped on ice. I fell, had a really bad sprain. And, the question comes then, do we just avoid parking lots? Now, the reason why I bring this up is because, it is back in the news because, in January, this month, Joe Biden extended the emergency pandemic orders that the government has. It's time for them to release us to live our lives. And, it's taken even further than that. When we live in a situation where now we treat everyone as though they need to have a safe space with crayons and Play-Doh and, whatever else, you see this permeating this generation. One interesting thing is that in colleges, the calls to counselors has gone up astronomically. I read one story not too long ago of some co-eds that were in a dormitory, saw a roach, and what did they do? They called the police, and then they called the counselor because they were so upset by it. It is time to not handicap the next generation. It's time for us to start living. When people say, and this also came to mind because I was somewhere yesterday and somebody said, be safe. Well, I understand if it's snowing outside and it's icy, I want everyone to be safe, but I want to say, be courageous, be bold, live a life full of adventure, because it is a fantasy that we can be risk-free. Now, it's interesting because the government has gone so far, not only to try to eliminate any harm physically. You look at, the nanny state in New York where they outlawed, certain sodas of a certain size because it could be bad for you. I'm sorry. I know people who fought in the military that were, in the forward operating bases who said in a documentary we did, I'm here so people can eat all the hot dogs they want if that's what they choose. So really it's about individual liberty. It's about living, because just existing to not die is not the same as living. Well, how far has this gone now? The CDC has issued recently language at the beginning of this year that will also go so far as to not hurt people's feelings. So the CDC, supposed to be about physical health, has said that they have a language guide now that is to prevent, quote, hurt feelings. And they have preferred terms. I'm going to give you some of them that are so absurd. And then we're going to be heading to a break here. I want to share a very inspiring story with you when we get back. But in this area of living life fully. So the preferred terms that the CDC has come up with is, instead of drug users, and they want, and persons who have relapsed, they're not acceptable. They want persons who use drugs, people who inject drugs, and persons who return to use. Okay. I understand helping someone get out of addiction and helping them through that process to not be shamed. But this, verbal gymnastics is crazy. Here's the one that really gets me. CDC has had preferred language. Instead of prisoner, inmate, criminal, parolee, detainee, convict, or ex-convict, it recommends people or persons who are incarcerated or detained, or persons in pretrial, or persons with charge. It sounds like person with child, like you're pregnant. They want you to say persons with charge instead of someone who is facing criminal charges. There is an attempt to avoid any consequences in our society. Any consequences at all. I took full responsibility for the consequences of spraining my wrist in an icy parking lot so I could go skiing and live life to the fullest. Honestly, there are times there needs to be consequences. If the CDC had its way, and I don't even know why it's weighing in on verbiage when it comes to criminals, but I got to tell you, there should be a stigma for someone who is a child predator, for instance, and is convicted of that. They should have a consequences. And I am not worried about hurting their feelings by calling them a criminal. They are not a person who was incarcerated. Sounds like something happened to them instead of their proactive free will choice that led them to do something which harmed society and innocence. Okay, time to take a breath on that one. When we come back, I'm going to return to this point of living fully, living courageously, because as we have, I don't think any of us should be surprised if the government begins to try to lock us down for our own good and tell us that we need to not even spend time with our family members over the holidays as they did about 7, 8, 9 months after the first declaration of an emergency. We need to be ready to stand up with that spirit of living courageously. So when we come back, I am going to share a story of someone who's very inspiring. And if this woman can talk about life being a grand adventure, it's my hope for all of us that we choose to live in that way. And then next time they try to shut us down, we say, nope, you know what? Tomorrow's not guaranteed to me, but every day I'm living, I'm actually going to live, not just exist, not to die, because they're not the same thing. When we come back, we're going to continue with this. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler today. Boy, that's how I'm feeling right now. That song, the coffee is flowing, caffeine is going through my veins. Been a great show already. Hard to believe that we are going to be heading into our final hour. When we are, I'm going to have Congressman Ken Buck joining me. We're going to talk about his fight against big tech. We're going to talk about what's going on right now in the House of Representatives. Everything from the new rules that are in place to this situation with the debt limit and the fact that the Biden administration wants it to just be approved with no caveats to it, and how the House is doing its part, being the ones that control the purse strings, to finally say, no, we're not going to just keep doing this without some changes. I think that's a good thing. So when we come back from the break at the top of the hour, we'll have Congressman Ken Buck with us talking about several things that are going on. We had the Capitol update here in Colorado with State Senator Mark Baisley talking about what's going on in Denver under the dome. Good to keep up to date with that. If you missed any of the show, go to our website, 710knus.com. That's 710knus.com. You can hear this show in its entirety. You can also hear my show that's heard Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. Today, Jimmy Zangenberger will be sitting in for me because my coffee just probably won't take me that far. But it's good to be here with you this morning. You know, we've been talking about this fantasy of risk-free living. And we just had a listener share something that is very in line with this, because we're talking about putting to the forefront again the values of resilience, grit, personal responsibility, all of those things. And they were sharing that right now today in Denver, there's a proposal being voted on that Kenny Baca is one of the people behind it, not surprising, that would basically take away any wrongdoing for jaywalkers in the city of Denver. Now, why does that tie in? Because it's time for a little personal responsibility. What will happen when they take that away, if they do? Well, what will happen is more people will get hurt, then they'll litigate, they'll sue the drivers who really are following their rules. Pedestrians need to follow their rules too. But what's interesting, as frequently happens, those on the left are using race as the issue. Kenny Baca is arguing basically that more people in minority get tickets in Denver because of it. This is the wrong conclusion once again. And she says there are more tickets given in Denver. Well, that's probably because it's a metropolitan area. There are more people walking across the street. There's more risk. There is more of a situation where that's going to occur. And in addition, look at the makeup of Denver. It is more predominantly minorities in many areas. So anyway, just another thing, let's not take away personal responsibility, including if you're walking on the street. So one of the things we've been talking about is this idea that just existing, living to not die, is not the same as living. And we probably going to have to continue this after we have Ken Buck, because I want to share this great story with you. But I think it's time that we become the proponents of just living again, courageous living, that phrase that we hear all the time, be safe. Well, yes, I'm a mom. I want my kids to be safe, but I also want them to live, have an adventure, be courageous, be bold, live life to the fullest, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed to anyone. Well, we have Tim from Westminster calling into the show. Tim, good morning. What do you want to say?
Flo, how you doing? Good to hear you in the morning.
You too. How are you, Tim?
All right. So you remember the saying in Shawshank, get busy living or get busy dying.
I love that.
And
yes.
we really should think about that.
Yes.
So when my son was a little boy, go to the doctor, his visit, and the doctor undresses him, and she's looking him up. He was about 3 or 4. And I said, hey, what are you looking for? She said, I'm looking for bumps and bruises and scratches. I said, hey, my son. She says, no, if he doesn't have any at his age, you're in trouble.
Oh.
Which means you're not letting him play. You're not letting him jump, because kids have to have bumps and bruises.
Yes. Yeah. What a great point. You know, our daughter broke her wrist when she was 9 because she was roller skating. And that's exactly the same thing. We were saying, you know what? You do that because you're living life, because you're having an adventure. That's a great point. And unfortunately, Tim, I think you probably agree with me. We've come a long way from that idea that bumps and bruises are okay. It means you're living a life. Do you see that change happening in our society as well?
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. So I'm a single parent, and I'm always nervous. My son's ice skating. We were skating the other day, and I'm like, come on, don't go so fast. Slow down, slow down. And he's just out there doing that. And then one of the parents said to me, hey, if he hasn't had a broken arm by now, that's good. I'm like, what? They said, come on. That's what happened with kids when they play. They take chances. Because if we restrict them, we're going to raise timid children. They'll be so timid that they won't do anything. And we just can't do that. We have to make sure that our kids are living, and we have to let go and let these things happen. Things do occur. I injured my rotator cuff ice skating with my son. I'm almost 60 years old. And one of the guys says, why are you doing that at 60? I said, I'm getting busy living, getting busy dying.
I love it. I always tell people the only broken bone I've had in my life so far, I've had some sprains, was when I was at a trampoline indoor park with our kids. I was ready to take a huge leap into the foam pit. I slipped and I hit the bar instead of, the jumping right in, broke my ankle. And I remember when I landed in the foam pit, and this little 6-year-old girl, as I'm dragging myself out, I knew I did it. She was like, I'm sorry, ma'am, can you get out of the foam pit? I'm like, I'm trying as quickly as I can, but I have no regrets. And our kids were like, way to go, Mom. At least you have a story. Well, Tim, you sound like you're a great dad as well as a great American. Thanks for calling into the show.
I'll try my best.
Take care. Bye-bye. Well, because we're heading to the break, we're going to have to tell this story in the next hour. I want you to stay with us because we're going to talk in the next hour after we hear from Ken Buck about how life is a grand adventure or nothing at all. That was a quote by a very famous individual who really showed the way to have grit, to live life to the fullest. And that's what we need to lead in, because too many are living in the bubble wrap crayon generation. Well, don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler. We'll have Congressman Ken Buck when we come back. Welcome back to The George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. We're all running on hour 4. How did that happen? It's been going by really quickly. If you missed any of the show or you missed any of my shows, which is heard Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m., please go to our website, 710knus.com, and you can hear any of the podcasts. We've been having great conversations, hearing from a lot of listeners through our free 710 KNUS app. Some great callers this morning as well. Well, we had the Under the Dome in Denver update with State Senator Mark Baisley at 7 o'clock. And now I'm very glad to have with me Congressman Ken Buck. He represents the Colorado's 4th Congressional District. He is actually my congressman as well. And he is going to be on the show now to talk about what's going on in the U.S. Congress, talk about his book and his battle against big tech and many other topics so that we have an inside scoop of what's happening. Ken, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I appreciate it.
Deborah, it's good to be with you.
Absolutely. So congratulations on being in the majority. How's it feeling there in D.C. right now?
Well, it feels like a very small majority, honestly. We had quite the drama around the speaker vote, and we are moving forward, I would say, gingerly on a lot of issues, because you have to make sure that you don't lose 4 votes in order to get something passed.
Yeah, absolutely. That is not a wide majority by any means. Tell me your thoughts, by the way, about that 15 vote. I think it was 15 votes that it went for the Speaker of the House, and then some of the changes to the rules that were part of what allowed that to finally come to a close. What were your thoughts about that process?
Well, I thought the process is a good process. We are a deliberative body, and I think the greatest deliberative body in the world. And to have just a rubber stamp process that has gone on for the past really almost century is just inappropriate, and I think undermines the whole function that the founders intended with the U.S. House. And so I thought having a good, robust debate about the rules and about the way the House is structured is positive. And I came to the conclusion earlier than a lot of my colleagues that the rules had been changed sufficiently to empower the rank and file members to do their jobs. And so I voted for Kevin McCarthy. Ultimately, I think all Republicans voted for him or didn't, just passed on the vote. But we are now moving forward, and I think we're moving forward in a healthy way.
I think so too. It's interesting because a lot of people don't like, the process not going smoothly, but oftentimes I think, it's not having Congress do its job, as you said, deliberative, if there isn't a process, instead of just speeding through things. A lot of people want government to work faster. I'd actually like it to move slower, to take time to discuss these things. So I agree, and when you look at what came out of it, they're all very common sense ideas that were agreed upon. So I'm grateful for that. Good that the work is going forward. So there's many things to talk to you about, Congressman, but you have been one of the people calling on Joe Biden first to release the logs of who went to his Delaware home, more information. Obviously, it's been coming out now. There were no logs, at least that we know of. Hunter Biden was there. He had people come, and now there's been more batches of classified documents that have been discovered. What do you think the next step is in this process?
Oh, that's a great question. The fact that the FBI allowed President Biden's lawyers to conduct the initial searches of his residence and offices is totally inappropriate. As a prosecutor for 25 years, and our mutual friend George Brauchler would agree with me on this, you need a chain of custody on these documents.
Yes.
You need a witness that can take the stand and testify that, I found this document in this location and it had a classified marking on it. And obviously there's an attorney-client privilege between Joe Biden and his lawyers that they can't be called to testify. So the case is very confusing. What I think it's more of a political case than it is a criminal case at this point, because what we have is Donald Trump being treated one way,
yes,
and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden being treated a completely different way. And it looks very much like it's partisan, and it looks very much like it's personal against Donald Trump because they didn't like him for one reason or another. And that's not the way law enforcement is supposed to run or should run. And it's why we will be conducting oversight hearings in this area.
Yeah, I think that is so key because when you talk about the chain of custody, I think every time something more is discovered, more questions arise. I mean, I think about some of these documents, 6 years they've been around and not secured. You have then Vice President Joe Biden leaving the White House after the 2016 election. Some of these documents now being discovered in the Penn Biden Center just in 2021. And the Penn Biden Center didn't open up until 2017. Where were those documents for a year? How did they get there? You know, all of these things do need to be answered, mainly to secure it. But you're right. The larger issue is the lack of disparity, or no, actually the great disparity in how President Trump and then President Biden have been treated. So, you know, one of the things that I appreciate about the House of Representatives, and I know you're on the Judiciary Committee, and there seems to be a real commitment to this. Some people also don't want investigations. They just want people to get on with their business. To me, there's a lack of accountability if that doesn't happen, because then there is no holding, you know, the executive branch accountable. When we're looking at the committees and the investigations that are going to be coming up, what do you think are some of the key ones that the House is going to be looking into?
Well, certainly in the Judiciary Committee, we are going to have a subcommittee that is going to be looking at the FBI and how they have been handling various issues. And really, I worked with the FBI for 15 years when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are great, hardworking agents who protect us every day. The leadership of the FBI has been a different story. James Comey clearly botched the Hillary Clinton email investigation and tried to start a special counsel investigation of Donald Trump by leaking information that never should have been leaked. The FBI's leadership really needs to be closely examined, and we need to make sure that those kinds of abuses don't happen again. But I think you're going to see investigations in a lot of different areas, and it's really the role of Congress and especially the House to conduct oversight. And it's amazing when we have a Republican president, the Republicans oppose oversight. When we have a Democrat president, Democrats oppose oversight. The reality is the American people are used to oversight in areas like during the Obama administration, Lois Lerner in the IRS.
Yes.
We had the gun situation with ATF at the border. So we've had a lot of good investigations that have exposed wrongdoing and have helped us become a stronger country.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's not, in these instances, it's not just, political payback. That's not what this is about. It is about investigating when the government has overstepped, whether it is the executive branch, whether it is, the intelligence services with the FBI. And by the way, being a mom who testified in front of our school board and then realized that the DOJ, was calling us domestic terrorists, and then, other intelligence services were involved. I thank you for investigating that, because that should never be the situation where it's so turned on individuals. When you're talking about the FBI, this kind of links to something else. What's coming out a lot with the Twitter situation now getting to big tech is that right at the heart of a lot of the censorship was a former FBI person who was literally going through suppressing things such as the Hunter Biden laptop story and really limiting that. So that was someone who'd, gone from that situation into big tech. So let's talk about that a little bit. You have a book, Crushed: Big Tech's War on Free Speech. Tell us about your book, first of all.
Well, Deborah, it's a book that I was the ranking member on the antitrust subcommittee in the last Congress, and what I observed is that we have four monopolies: Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google, who control the flow of information in our country and really around the world. And that is so dangerous, because we saw what they did with the Hunter Biden laptop story. We've seen what they've done with Senator Rand Paul's investigation of vaccines by deplatforming him. They can decide on their own if they disagree with a particular type of speech. They can deplatform people and they can affect the information that the public gets. We need competition in the marketplace, and we need to make sure we have 5 Googles and not one Google controlling 94% of the searches. The same with the other companies. And so I wrote the book to explain why it's so dangerous to have monopolies over the flow of information. We used to have monopolies on railroads and oil and gas and banks and other steel and other areas. And that's inefficient and it costs consumers more. But when you've got it in an area like information, it is really a threat to our country.
Well, it's interesting because when you talk about Google, I was reading this, article recently about how when they founded Google, it started kind of as an altruistic thing. We want to gather all of the world's information into one location. Well, they so far succeeded in being the primary source of all that. It's really nearly impossible for anyone to come in as a true competitor on that. And when you're talking about these previous monopolies, we watched The Aviator recently about Howard Hughes and how Pan Am tried to take over a monopoly over air travel and, how Howard Hughes fought against that. So here's the question, because I'm in agreement with this, but obviously I get questions from the other side. There is the principle of government staying out of private business. Now, I tend to argue that this has gone beyond that to the public sphere, the public square, where it should be free. How do you answer that question of what is government's role in this circumstance, and what do you think the solution is?
Well, I can answer it, and I answer it in Crushed, the new book, but I have to tell you, there isn't a free market. You and I believe in free markets taking care of situations. When you control 94% of the searches, there's no free market. And so government's role, in my view, is not to decide what the truth is on the internet. And it's not to regulate the internet in the sense that we regulate railroads or air traffic. The role of government at this point is just to make sure that these monopolies don't crush their competition, don't discriminate in a way that's unfair and illegal on their competition, so that we can have competition in this marketplace. And once we get competition, then the free market principles apply again, and we can step back and allow the market to operate.
No, that's a great point, because it's not what the left wants to do, where they tip the scales and promote one company over another, or promote one business or one situation. This is literally making it so there can be free market competition. I very much agree with that. What do you see coming down the pipe for that? Obviously, after Elon Musk taking over Twitter, the Twitter files, which is this ongoing gift that keeps on giving, is revealing a lot. What do you think is going to happen now legislatively in the House of Representatives because of that?
Well, I think you're going to see action on Section 230, which is a part of the code that gives these tech companies immunity. And it was there was a purpose behind it, and it's almost 3 decades old now. But when the internet was just getting formed, we didn't want child pornography on the internet, or we didn't want a terrorist group recruiting terrorists on the internet. So we gave these companies the ability to be immunized if they took things off their platforms. The problem is that they've gone way beyond what we would all agree is dangerous conduct, and they've gotten into this speech area. And we need to make sure we draw a bright line that says, yes, you can take information off if it's dangerous, but you can't take information off because you disagree with the viewpoint. So we're going to definitely see some 230 legislation coming up. And I think we'll also see some antitrust legislation. And then the last area really is this area of privacy, where when you get on GPS and find the location that you want to go to, the company continues to track you after that. And when you Google something they now are going to advertise to you based on that. People
Mm-hmm.
should have the choice of turning on and off those tracking devices on their phone and make that again more competitive.
Yeah, you make a great point because 30 years ago, you would have hoped, and maybe they did at the beginning, they would make this decision, having the right to pull things off based on, like you said, child pornography or terrorism or whatever. But we came to such a point that, you talked about Rand Paul being deplatformed, and yet Twitter would keep the Ayatollah on when he was calling for the death to all Israel. So obviously that got completely changed. And I think that's going to be something that is much needed because it's gone in a direction that was not anticipated. One last question before I let you go, because I know you have a busy day. So the debt limit is very much in the news right now. And I was reading today, everyone knows we reached $31.4 trillion gross federal debt, and they're calling it a debt limit crisis. What I think is interesting is right now, Speaker McCarthy is, I guess, in negotiations with Joe Biden, and the White House is wanting absolutely no adjustments for raising the debt limit. But from what I understand, Speaker McCarthy is talking about cutting government spending in relationship to it. What do you think should happen there? People talk about the debt limit in many ways. And what do you think is going to come out of it?
Well, I think that we need to have spending caps.
Mhm.
I don't know that we're going to get to the point where we get a majority in the House or Senate and to agree that we're going to cut spending. I certainly would like to see us cut spending, but you have to be realistic with the small majority that we have trying to move forward on that. I certainly think going forward we could reduce the rate of increase of our spending, and that kind of spending cap, even if we capped it at you're not going to spend more than you did in 2021, would be very positive on the economy and on our deficit. And so I'm hoping we can get spending caps out of this negotiation.
Absolutely. It's somebody was talking to me about, well, this should happen in appropriations, not in relationship to the debt ceiling limit. And yet it doesn't seem to happen in appropriations sometimes. What is your thought about connecting it to the debt limit versus doing it in the process of appropriations?
Well, the problem with the appropriations process is it's an additive process. If you need to get a vote, you add spending to get that person's vote in the appropriations process. The debt limit is a process where you you draw a line and say you can only spend up to this much money, and the Congress has to approve any spending over that. And so it is more appropriate in my mind to put spending caps in a debt ceiling bill than it is. You'd never get them in an appropriations bill.
Yeah, whether or not that's where it was originally intended with their founding documents, it's not happening in appropriations. And so, honestly, anyone who understands negotiations knows we have to work when there are moments like this and not just say we're going to keep kicking the can down the road. What I want to end on a happy note. I love the fact that, prior to the election, I had both Rick Scott on and also, another senator as well. And they were talking about if we don't want 87,000 new IRS agents, let's not fund 87,000 new IRS agents. When it comes to cutting spending in the House of Representatives, having the power of the purse strings, do you see that stopping? I know that was a part of, the budget bill. Where do you see that moving forward?
We've passed that in the House.
Yes.
We've now defunded that. It'll
Mhm.
go to the Senate. It won't. Our bill will not move in the Senate, but they want to pass an appropriations bill for the Department of Treasury, and that's where that fight will happen.
Right.
And I think it is a fight. It is a hill worth dying on.
Mm-hmm.
If they get 87,000 new IRS agents, they will use that the way they have used the FBI, the way they have used the Environmental Protection Agency to target small businesses in this country, to target those who they disagree with politically. And it is incredibly dangerous to weaponize an agency, a tax collecting agency like the IRS. So I think it is a bill that you won't see Republicans in the House vote for if those IRS agents are included in that bill.
I think that's great, because the reality is when you think about the IRS, it's only directed in one direction, and that's towards American citizens. And the day of needing that many and those carrying arms to take out, the gangsters, when they used to do it, it's not needed for that anymore. So I agree with you. There are certain places we absolutely need to take a stand, and that is certainly an area to cut. Well, thank you. Thank you, Congressman Buck, for being on the show. Any last words before I let you go for a busy day?
Well, I just really appreciate you talking about the book a little bit, Crushed, and folks can get that at local bookstores and online. And I look forward to seeing people. I've met people in the supermarket that have had the book with them, and I've signed the book. And I just look forward to seeing people and being able to visit more about this really important subject.
Oh, absolutely. It really is the fight of our day for the public square. And that book, once again, is Crushed: Big Tech's War on Free Speech by Congressman Ken Buck. Definitely, you have years of your experience in that and some very good solutions. Thank you so much for joining me on this show today. I really appreciate it.
It's good to be with you, Deborah. Take care.
You too. Take care. Well, that was my guest, Congressman Ken Buck, talking about what's going on in the House of Representatives, some encouraging news about standing strong on, investigation. It's a very big part, actually, about the role of Congress. It is to pass legislation. Oftentimes, unfortunately, that is too often shoved down to the bureaucratic level. It is to create budgets, which has been kicked down the can, but it is also for holding other branches accountable, our checks and balances. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you if you think that the new Republican majority in the House should not be focusing on investigations, if they should just move forward, or whether or not that is an appropriate role for them to be playing. The phone number 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. Also, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of the public square. Do you think government should get involved in breaking up monopolies for Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google, particularly Google, that controls 94% of all searches? Or do you think that's a step too far? Should government be involved there? Want to hear from you. 303-696-1971, 1971. You can also, by the way, text us through the free 710 KNUS app. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to The George Show. I am Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. Today, my regular show time, 3 to 4 p.m., Monday through Friday. Jimmy Stangenberger will be sitting in for me. I'll be back in my regular time slot tomorrow, Tuesday. Thank you for being with me today, though. I greatly appreciate it. We've already had a great show. Amazing that we're already heading into the last half hour. If you missed any of the show, go to our website, 710canus.com. That's 710canus.com. We've had some great guests on the show. We had a Capitol update under the dome in Denver with State Senator Mark Baisley, talking about what's going on there, where the stands can be taken, what our backstops are. Very good insight. And we have some wiggle room there of what we can do to keep some radical legislation from making its way through. A lot of bad legislation will make its way through, but hopefully some of the worst will be stopped. Some has already been pulled, which has been good to see. And we talked about how in the wake of this draft legislation from Democrat Representative Epps, that would basically outlaw pretty much the majority of guns throughout Colorado, any semi-automatic weapon, including the top 10 most popular handguns used for women for self-defense, that is in draft, may not ever make it out. And Jared Polis, who wants to be president of the United States someday, which is pretty much what everyone thinks are his political aspirations, actually came out and said, no, we just need to reinforce the red flag laws. So he may be indicating that there will not be support for such radical legislation. So we had that update. Then we had Alliance Defending Freedom, Ryan Tucker, talking about some wins that are so good to focus on. I talk a lot in my show about how one of our beachheads from which we can fight is our judicial system. Some wins that Alliance Defending Freedom has had for religious liberty, for individual liberty, for freedom of speech. Some good, encouraging news there. One of our other beachheads is the House of Representatives in D.C. Very slim majority, only 4 votes, not a lot of wiggle room. But we just had Congressman Ken Buck on the show talking about the work that's being done there. The fact that the House of Representatives is supposed to be a branch for accountability, checks and balances, and a lot of the hearings are doing that. We've also been talking about this renewed push, it seems like, once big government gets a hold of something, they never want to let go. And that is related to what has happened in this COVID era. This push to basically continue to control our lives. There is a renewed push, by the way, under the Biden administration to re-implement the mask mandates on airplanes. That was struck down in federal court in Florida last April, and they're fighting to get that reinstated. It's interesting timing because just this past week, a CNN medical analyst and Washington Post columnist, Dr. Leanna Wen, she admitted in an article that the medical community is, quote, overcounting the amount of COVID deaths and hospitalizations. Many people, by the way, have said this is about 2.5 years too late, kind of really affirming what a lot of people have already suspected. I'm just going to give you a couple of details because she quotes a lot of epidemiologists and doctors and specialists throughout the United States and internationally. One of them, Robin Dretler, who was an attending physician at Emory Decatur Hospital, said that 90% of patients diagnosed with COVID are actually in the hospital for some other illness. I think we all know that. Absolutely. And then there's also an infectious disease physician who said that about 30% of total hospitalizations with COVID were primarily contributed to the virus. I find it interesting, by the way, that you go abroad, and in Denmark, for instance, there's an epidemiologist who talks to international issues, Dr. Tracy Hoag, I think that's how you say it. Interesting spelling, not like an umlaut, but in the Danish way of doing it. They said that there is good evidence that COVID deaths in Denmark, for instance, were only 67% incidental. In other words, people died with COVID, not of COVID. What is interesting is when you go to Denmark, that many people think is more socialist in nature, that doctor actually said, quote, "It's amazing how long it has taken the U.S. to accept that this over-reporting is a problem. Well, many people have known it was a problem, but now we just are getting the final facts to show that it is. Now, what does it have to do with one of my larger topics that I've been talking about, which is living courageously, living a life of adventure? I think the reason why so many of our fellow citizens so quickly gave into this control is because, as a parent of teenagers now, I've seen it. This generation of parents have been so contributing to it. There has been this bubble wrap mentality. Somehow, the fictional fantasy that we can live our lives without consequence, that there is a way to live to just not die. Well, those aren't the same things. Existing just to not die is not the same as living. And we've really handicapped young people and honestly, our civilization at large. It's time for us to be the ones that reinstitute what I would consider to be these virtues of grit, resilience, determination, the ability to get back up again, competition, not ruling out things like the pros of sports, where a lot of the cultural elite are trying to take out football now in the wake of the Damar Hamlin situation, instead of saying, no, wait a second, it's in competition that we find out our strengths, our weaknesses, our resilience, all of those things. Well, we've been talking about that because if we don't talk about what it really means to live, which is not the same as not dying, then we won't be ready to push back against this renewed effort to use this false sense of security to try to get people to comply. I've been talking about a really inspiring story, which is someone who exemplified this. And I'm just going to share one of her most famous quotes, and then we're going to talk about her story as we conclude today's show. But the quote is this. The quote is, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. When we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about who said that. You may already know. If you do, I want to hear from you on our 710 KNUS app. Text me if you know who said that famous quote. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And then we're going to share a little inspiration as we start out the week from her story of how we can begin to talk to our neighbors who are beginning to wake up, who perhaps have been quarantined. Now, listen, if someone has a propensity to illness, if someone has a compromised system, then that is one thing. Absolutely. Make a wise choice. But when there are people who are no longer actually living because they're so afraid of dying, we can be the ones to talk about a new narrative, and that it's not the government's job to tell us we can't drink large sodas or something else. That is our own decision to make. I'll share this one story before we go to the break. I remember when COVID first was really taking hold of everyone, and there was someone I spoke to with great consternation. They were upset that their 90-year-old father was not quarantining, was going out unmasked where he was allowed to. And they were so concerned that their 9-year-old father might pass away from this. And he basically said, look, tomorrow is not guaranteed. I'm going to live my life to the fullest until the very last moment. I think that is a great spirit and action to take. Everybody's a free will choice to do what they want to. When we come back, I'm going to share who said that quote. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about grit as we head into the week and prepare to talk to our neighbors about why, no, we shouldn't have more mask mandates again. Yes, we should know the reality of the COVID details and why it's not the government's job to wrap us up in bubble wrap, because at the end of the day, that only comes with them telling us what we cannot do. Not going to stand, I bet, in Colorado where people are telling us we can't ski because it's dangerous. Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about that. Want to hear from you, 303-696-1971, and already getting great answers. Yes, people are already guessing who that quote is by through our 710 KNUS app. Don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler, heard Monday through Friday on my normal showtime, 3 to 4 p.m. Today, Jimmy Sangenberger will be filling in for me as I'm filling in for George because my big cup of coffee, those of you watching online can see that, is out. Might not take me all the way to 3 o'clock. It has been great to be with you all. I have really enjoyed it. If you missed any of the show, please do go to our 710knus.com website. You can hear it. You can hear any of my past shows. And also, you can follow me on my Facebook page at Deb Flora Show, the Deborah Flora Show, also Twitter, etc. That's where I post most of the articles that I take the time to read so you don't have to. I know you guys read a lot anyway, but I spend a lot of time going through that, and that's where I post a lot of those articles so that we can all be equipped to go out and talk to our neighbors. Because I got to tell you, I think that this is the season of persuasion. I mean, every season should be the season of persuasion, but in the lieu of winning the races we hoped we had in 2022. Now we have to do the work of talking to our neighbors, helping them connect the dots between the growing ills in Colorado that unfortunately will get worse and their vote. So next time around, they do connect those dots a little bit more directly. One of the things we're talking about today is one of the tools of persuasion is being informed. That's why I was sharing some of the latest moves by the Biden administration and the CDC to try and to continue to over micromanage. That's actually, repetitive, but micromanage our lives. Continuing, the CDC wants to reinstate mask mandates. Joe Biden once again continued the pandemic emergency declaration. They want to put mask mandates back into airplanes. That's a lot of what's going on. And our neighbors who we need to persuade have been conditioned to go along with this because of what I call the bubble wrap generation, which is this entire, I'd say this parental group. Our kids are in their late teens. I saw it when they were young and a little bit before that, where there was this false perception that obviously parents want to protect their kids, but they got to a point where they truly believed they could somehow raise their children to never have consequences, whether that was mentally and emotionally with the Trophy for Everyone generation, which arrived in college campuses where there's Play-Doh and crayons if you need to self-soothe. It's time for us to be the ones to talk about resilience, adventure, courage, beginning to communicate to our neighbors that, first of all, a risk-free life is a fantasy. Second, it isn't a life worth living, a risk-adverse life, because living or existing simply not to die is not the same thing as living. So before the break, I was talking about a famous quote, and we've had a couple of listeners already guess who this was by. The quote is, "Life is either a daring adventure or nothing." I want to share the story of this remarkable person because as we work to persuade our neighbors, it's good to remember those who really exemplified grit, resilience, adventure, courage, living a full life, even when they were told that they couldn't or shouldn't. And yes, the woman who said that life is either a daring adventure or nothing was Helen Keller. Several of our listeners did guess that. I wish I could give you a prize, but instead, if you're one of the folks that guessed that, I will simply say you've already won living life to the fullest. If you know that quote, you're already probably doing it. So I just want to share an example. For instance, many of us know that Helen Keller was, she was born without any handicaps, but when she was about 19 months old in Alabama, she became blind and deaf because of an infection that led her to not be able to speak. And her story could have ended there. Never would have known her name. But her parents, unlike this generation that's raised the folks that are currently calling for police officers when they see rats or roaches in their dormitories. Not all kids. Our kids have been taught to be resilient and to have grit. But her parents didn't do that. Instead, they hired, as we know, the miracle worker, as her story is called, Ann Sullivan, who also had overcome a disability. And through her help, Helen Keller triumphed and broke out of that. But she didn't just stop there even. That would have been a remarkable story. What did this woman who exemplifies grit, resilience, a life of courage, what did she go on to do? Well, she graduated cum laude in 1904, the first deaf-blind person to graduate from college. After graduation, she began her life's work of helping blind and deaf people, not just in America, but around the world. She appeared before state and national legislatures and international forums. She traveled the world when very few people did that, let alone women, let alone anyone with a handicap. She visited 39 countries on 5 continents, published 14 books, and produced numerous articles. She was also, by the way, a valiant supporter of the suffrage movement and the civil rights movement. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1964 and lived to be 87 years old. That's the key. She lived every single one of those 87 years. Someone who had every reason to retreat, to self-quarantine, to pull back, to not risk anything. Instead, she lived fully. And that's why I want to share her quote. It's interesting. Winston Churchill, of all people, who helped lead Great Britain through one of the greatest trials, kept their grit and determination up during the onslaught of Nazi Germany. He called Winston Churchill the greatest woman of our age. I think of many ages, actually. She was also known as the First Lady of Courage. When she finally passed away, I love this phrase because this ties it in. She was eulogized as one of the few persons not born to die. That's really the question we can ask our neighbors who have been conditioned to accept overregulation, intrusion of government into their life out of fear. Are we living not to die? Or are we living? Are we actually living? I shared the story at the beginning of this conversation. I recently went skiing, tubing, snowmobiling, and sledding with our family. And we lived. And were those dangerous activities? Yes, to a certain extent. But where did I actually hurt myself on that trip? Walking through the parking lot and slipping on the ice. I'm not going to avoid parking lots just because that happened. The fantasy that we can somehow avoid all risk is just that. Let's communicate that to our neighbors. Here's what I want to share too. That passage, that quote, life is either a daring adventure or nothing, comes from a book she published in 1940 called Let Us Have Faith, and a chapter titled Faith Fears Not. And listen to what she said. Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. God himself is not secure. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. The fearful are caught as often as the bold. Faith alone defends. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. To keep our faces toward change and behave like free spirits in the presence of fate is strength undefeatable. That's why on my show, instead of saying be safe, which a lot of us hear today, I say be courageous, live boldly, live fully, have a great, grand adventure. That's my hope for you this week. That's my wish for all of us as we go into a new week, because that way we can persuade our neighbors to do the same. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS.